Testing 1 2, testing, English channel. Testing 1 2, testing, 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 testing to check for the ASL feed. Testing, yes, English booth is testing. All right. Okie doke. Do you want us? Okay, we'll wait. Okay.
Sole, no tenemos a nadie en lenguaje de señas.
At the heart of the Caribbean, cushioned on sandy shores and surrounded
Espérate, Luis.
Ahí se...
Ahora sí. Está bien.
Okay. So
Okay. Testing English with sign language. Ready? Testing. Testing. Oh, tell you a story. Okay, what kind of story? Oh, well, Sonia and I have been sharing some stories, but I don't think that we want to share any of those. Not right now. You know what? Everybody's complaining about how hot it is, and it's genuinely not even all that hot at all. Like, oh,
Gonna go to Spanish. Español, para me.
Escuché que tú dijiste español.
Okay.
Listo, hablo fuera.
Gracias, español. Let's continue with English.
This is English, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. This is English. Can you hear me? English, English, English. Yes? Yes, great.
Barbuda is an eco-lover's paradise, where long, pink and sandy white beaches are protected by impressive barrier reefs, keeping you as secluded and untouched as the island's beauty. Just as Antigua and Barbuda's beauty will capture your imagination, its history will also enthrall you. From early natives through Christopher Columbus and recent British influence, these islands are a truly unique place where past and present meet harmoniously at every corner. Cliff-top forts and 18th century harbours to plantations and historic windmills, Antigua's rich history as a gateway to the West Indies is only part of its allure. Antigua
Buenos días, good morning. Por favor, nos podemos sentar.
if we could please take our seats, we'll be starting soon.
Take a seat, please. We're gonna start in a few minutes. Thank you.
The wide variety of accommodation and amenities are first class. From secluded and private villas and beautifully appointed hotels to shorefront restaurants, fine dining and luxurious spas. Everything you need is there to feel relaxed and pampered. Antigua's capital city, St. John's, is charming and traditional, bustling with life, warm and welcoming. This traditional West Indian city is a popular hub for shopping and dining. St. John's is also home to the citadel of a Caribbean passion, the Sir Vivian Richards cricket ground. While across the island, at the historic English harbour, sailing fanatics from all over the world descend on Antigua to take part in the world-famous Antigua Sailing Week. Well known for its annual carnival, Antigua and Barbuda is also home to a vibrant music scene. Come discover Antigua and Barbuda, where the beach is only the beginning.
Se vuelve a ver.
Sunshine glowing on a turquoise sea. I'm swaying just for you and me. Island rhythm never leaves a trace, but it's tattooed on my soul's embrace. White sand stretch with the heart runs free. Laughter echoes on the island breeze. Steel drums playing on the moonlit trees. Moving easy, living out a fantasy. Antigua's calling.
Muy buenos días,
Very good morning, everyone.
gentlemen. We ask all delegations and all participants kindly come to your places so we may start our session this morning. Rogamos a las delegaciones.
We ask that delegations and participants please approach their seats so that we can begin our morning session.
Está trabajando mi micrófono. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buenos días a todas y todos.
Good morning, everyone.
It is my pleasure to welcome you to this dialogue with civil society, workers, the private sector, and social actors. This dialogue, held at each of our General Assemblies, provides a vital platform to hear directly from the voices of civil society. We extend our sincere gratitude to the government of Antigua and Barbuda for graciously hosting us for their efforts in making this event a success, with participation from over 300 representatives of civil society across the region. It is my honor now to introduce the Foreign Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Ambassador Everly Paul Chet Green, who will serve as our moderator for this morning's session. Mr. Minister, thank you for joining us and for leading this important dialogue.
Distinguished heads of delegation, permanent and alternate representatives of OAS member states, Secretary General Albert Ramdin, Assistant Secretary General Ambassador Nestor Mendez, secretaries of the General Secretariat, esteemed representatives of civil society, workers in the private sector, other social actors, I welcome you to Antigua and Barbuda and to this very vital dialogue of the 55th General Assembly. It is both an honor and an imperative for a small island state like mine to host this important exchange. We know very well from lived experience the challenges of climate vulnerability, uneven development, and the need for resilient institutions across our hemisphere. I thank each of you, especially civil society colleagues, for traveling to Antigua and Barbuda. Your presence here reaffirms the advocacy for grassroots to global forums, which is essential to ensure more inclusive, responsive governance. We gather today at a moment when many societies in the Americas confront multiple crises. These include irregular migration, environmental shocks, social fractures, trade challenges, threats to democratic norms, and respect for human rights. The perspectives you bring will sharpen our collective response while lending legitimacy to our decisions. As chair, I welcome frank and forward-looking dialogue. No state, large or small, can advance sustainable solutions on its own. Civil society, workers and private sector voices often blend to sound the alarm before crises erupt, identifying pathways that governments may inadvertently overlook. Therefore, your contributions are essential to grounding our deliberations and our aspirations. As your chair, I urge that our discussion in this dialogue focus on ideas that are practical and pragmatic and which can take us forward together. This dialogue is the forum for advancing ideas that can lead to tangible progress on matters such as disaster management, expanding employment opportunities, tackling poverty, and safeguarding human rights. I therefore encourage you to speak candidly, to challenge assumptions respectfully, and to propose concrete initiatives that advance the common good. I extend special gratitude to civil society and social actors for your vigilance, innovation, and unwavering commitment to justice and equity. Your advocacy is vital, not only for the Americas, but as a signal to the world that inclusive multilateralism can deliver results. With these thoughts, I now have the very distinct pleasure of introducing our esteemed Secretary General, Ambassador Albert Ramdin. Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minister Green. Good morning to all. I thank Minister Chet Green for his leadership in hosting this 55th OAS General Assembly and for making all arrangements for a successful outcome. And I join him when he says that let us be practical, result-oriented, respectful, and that we have a constructive discussion with regard to how we build our societies. I recognize also Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General, the permanent representatives and heads of delegations of member states present, our esteemed representatives of civil society, indigenous people, Afro-descendant, communities, workers, the private sector, and our young people, our youth. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm also very pleased to warmly welcome you to this dialogue, held within the framework of the 55th regular session of the OAS General Assembly, convened under the theme, Building Resilient and Inclusive Economies in the Americas. This dialogue, which takes place now for over 2 decades, has served as a space for the open and participatory exchange of perspectives, reflecting the OAS's commitment to inclusivity. The fact that it is taking place here in Antigua and Barbuda is a recognition of the importance of giving voice and visibility to all regions of the hemisphere. And therefore, we thank Antigua and Barbuda for hosting us and for ensuring that all necessary arrangements to provide an ideal setting with results for this dialogue are in place. And the theme that brings us together, which I just mentioned, together this year is not just an economic call. It is a deeply social one. To speak of resilient and inclusive economies is to recognize that economic growth is only sustainable when it is shared, when it reaches all sectors of the population, and when it is supported by strong democratic institutions, respect for human rights, and the participation of all. In this context, the role of civil society is one of strategic importance. Civil society organizations, in their diversity of approaches and areas of work, form an invaluable network of knowledge, of experience, proximity to the everyday realities of our communities. You are essential allies in translating our hemispheric goals into concrete actions and tangible results. Since the announcement of my candidacy, I have been clear in stating that dialogue with civil society must not be limited to formal events or isolated moments. It must be a continuous, structured, substantive, and binding process. Because your work, your proposals, and your well-founded critiques from time to time contribute to strengthening the quality of our multilateral decisions and the legitimacy of our organization, and help us all build a lasting, just, fair, and inclusive society. Allow me to highlight 3 areas where your participation is particularly indispensable. First, in the defense and the embodiment of democracy and human rights. We live in times where democracies are challenged by polarization, disinformation, and institutional distrust. Civil society organizations play a fundamental role as watchdogs of transparency, guarantors of accountability, and promoters of genuine citizen participation. The second area is in the promotion of social inclusion and equity. Poverty, exclusion, and discrimination remain structural challenges in still too many places across our hemisphere. Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, communities, migrants, persons with disabilities, LGBTI+ individuals, religious groups, women, and youth continue to demand real spaces for participation and development. You, through your work, directly engage with these populations, providing solutions, generating opportunities, and opening doors for those historically marginalized. The third area is our constant need for adaptation and creating resilience to new challenges: climate change, food insecurity, migration crises, and natural disasters impact our people disproportionately. The resilience of our economies and societies depends on strong public policies, but also on coordinated action by civil society, the private sector, and multilateral organizations. I believe that this is a moment of transition, but as well an opportunity for the Organization of American States. In this new phase, the administration prioritizes strengthening structured and permanent dialogue with civil society. It is not just about listening, but about creating effective mechanisms to incorporate your contributions into the formulation, implementation, and evaluation of hemispheric policies. We want a more open OAS, more connected to the real dynamics of our societies, an OAS which stands close to the people of the Americas. Multilateralism will only be effective if it is inclusive. And inclusion cannot be rhetorical. It must be a constant practice. I thank the member states that support this process, the civil society section for its daily work in strengthening these ties with all of you, and most especially, I thank each of you, civil society representatives, as our strategic partners, for your work, your dedication, your commitment to public service, and your continued interest and involvement in the work of the organization. Today's dialogue is a clear manifestation of what we want to continue building, a hemisphere where we work together, where we combine our efforts, we recognize diversity, respect diversity, and we seek shared consensus, common goals to ensure stronger democracy, lasting peace, and a truly inclusive development. As a Caribbean citizen, where civil society engagement is paramount, and as a citizen of the Americas, and also as in my current position as Secretary General, I reaffirm today my personal and institutional commitment to make the OAS an increasingly effective platform where all voices of the hemisphere are heard and have a real impact. Therefore, I wish you a productive, honest, frank, and result-oriented, enriching dialogue. I thank you very much.
Thank you, SG. Without further ado, let me explain the methodologies for today's dialogue. This session is scheduled to last for 3.5 hours. And to ensure the efficient use of time, each speaker will be allotted a maximum of 3 minutes. I repeat, each speaker will be allotted a maximum of 3 minutes. I ask that we respect this limit, as microphones will be automatically switched off or muted after 3 minutes. Following each round of presentations, representatives of member states will have the opportunity to respond. These responses will be organized into 4 separate rounds, with priority given to those who notified us in advance of their intent to participate. I kindly ask that you keep your remarks brief. The 4 rounds will include presentations from representatives of civil society and social actors. The dialogue will conclude at 11:30 a.m. We'll now proceed to the first round of interventions. We begin with interventions from the representatives of the indigenous peoples. In that regard, I'm pleased to invite Cindy Lucia Toledo from the National Council of Indigenous Peoples in the Diaspora to take the floor. She does so on behalf of the Coalition of Indigenous Coordination, Abby Ayala, and Mr. Lido. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Distinguido Albert Randin.
Distinguished Albert Randin, representatives of the member states, we take this opportunity to speak as an indigenous collaborative. We want to extend our greetings during this 55th session for the OASGA. Our fight to be recognized requires that we establish effective mechanisms to build economies that are inclusive, resilient, and non-extractive, that support our people's well-being. We believe that this responsibility is shared among all actors in the region, and we declare the following. First off, we want to express our deep concern for the constant violations of human rights and the criminalization of indigenous peoples who defend their ancestral lands and their environment against irresponsible mining and extractive and unfettered extractive practices. This causes a loss in resources. It causes discrimination, social exclusion. There are issues with delivering justice. There's forced sterilization. There's violence and forced displacement. In the last 2 years, state repression against indigenous activists has increased in Latin America through institutions that are supposed to protect our autonomy and our rights as First Nations. And we require, or we demand, the proper, well, we demand due process for all of our colleagues who are unduly being held. The representatives of the 48 Quiche cantons who are incarcerated by the government of Guatemala. These leaders resisted for 108 days peacefully through their legitimate protests throughout Guatemala. This pattern shows that the Guatemalan justice system has been co-opted. We have corrupt politicians and there's organized crime involved. Secondary laws are being approved to control and monitor excessive spending dedicated to indigenous peoples. They are keeping entire states under their control. It's not that we're against accountability or transparency. We have that, but we want to be able to control our own projects. We're not existentialists. We want our own economies based on our own cosmovisions. Making sure that we don't lose our territories is the government's responsibility. That's why we want bonuses and credits so that we can fight against all of the battles being waged against our peoples. All we want is a better life. Secondly, let's make history. We come from Aviala. We are first in time and first in our rights. And we denounce the exportation of our brethren in North America. We want an end to discrimination and structural racism, which affects our communities, especially in the United States, which, by the way, goes against that country's own constitution. We are denied visibility, dignity, and our own story. Given this context, we demand the following. First off, the full implementation of the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including the creation and incorporation of a permanent group of indigenous peoples within the OAS, made up of indigenous representatives only, with its own budget. Secondly, we want effective action from international organizations, the Inter-American Human Rights Court, the Center for Justice for the Americas. We want all of these institutions to work to protect the rights of indigenous peoples and pursuant and have an ombudsman designated in this regard. Thirdly, a plurinational national context at the inter-American level for our interests. We also want to make sure that our economies are protected so that they can be inclusive. States must facilitate such inclusion. Only with such progress will we be able to reduce forced migration and guarantee the well-being of our communities in Guatemala. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Toledo. We now have an intervention of the coalition represented by Alexandra Wang from Women Against Rape, Inc. Ms. Wang, you have the floor.
Excellencies, Secretary General, distinguished delegates, the 55th regular session of the OAS General Assembly convenes at a critical juncture for our hemisphere. Escalating climate disasters, global financial instability, and entrenched inequalities threaten the lives and livelihoods of millions, not only in the small island development states like ours, but across all nations. The theme, Building Resilient, Inclusive Economies in the Americas, demands a level of understanding, strategic unity, and bold actions never seen before. one that prioritizes the most vulnerable and transforms promises to tangible progress. We, the Caribbean Coalition of Civil Society Organizations, represent voices from across the Caribbean, grassroots advocates, community leaders, marginalized groups who witness daily the gaps between policy and reality. Today, we call on the OAS and its member states to center resilience with equity, debt relief, and concessional funding to recover from disasters and invest in green infrastructure, direct access to climate adaptation funds for local communities, not just governments, ratification and implementation of the Escazú Agreement to protect environmental defenders and ensure climate justice. We also seek that there should be a form of democratization of economic inclusion. We are looking at formal recognition of CSOs as partners in OAS, policy making, and afterthoughts, funding mechanisms for Caribbean CSOs to amplify grassroots solutions from gender equity to youth entrepreneurship. We look at labor and livelihoods. We think of our fisher folk, our market vendors, who form the backbone of our economies. Let us seek to uphold human rights as economic foundation. Resilience begins with safeguarding dignity, which means that the OAS must enforce ratification.
Thank you, Ms. Wong, for sharing your insights and perspectives. I remind us of the ground rules, 3 minutes. At this time, I'm pleased to welcome Maria Jose Corvalan Farias from the Association of Women's Rights, who represent the Coalition of Human Rights of Women in the Americas. Ms. Corvalan, please proceed.
Asamblea.
Honorable Assembly, where in your agendas are women's rights? To the states present here today, we ask, where do you prioritize our lives? Because as we meet here today, a woman is killed every 2 hours in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, we gather under the slogan, Building Resilient and Inclusive Economies. And we must be clear, there can be no resilience or inclusion while women, our communities, and our territories remain under attack. This is why it's so important for us to uphold the principle of human rights and institutionalize these bodies. We must uphold the principle of non-regression and the agreed language across all instruments of the inter-American system. In our region, human rights, including sexual and reproductive rights, are being restricted due to the rise of fundamentalists and authoritarian governments who erode our democracy, and they cling to power through fear and oppression at the expense of their people's freedom and dignity. This so-called resilience, therefore, becomes a trap when it expects us to silently endure structural violence without justice or a fair distribution of resources. That is why we demand our right to safe, legal abortion, comprehensive health care, and a life free of violence. There can only be inclusion if women in all of our diversity are at the very heart of analysis and decision-making. Our economies are sustained by the invisible, precarious labor of thousands and millions of women in LAC. And we are the ones facing poverty, hunger, criminalization, forced displacement, and persecution for defending our territories, our bodies, our rights, and our lives. we issue an urgent call to action to reclaim and safeguard our human rights, to protect activists who defend the land, the water, women who are Afro-descendants, trans women, indigenous people, rural women, children, youth, the elderly, migrants, people with disabilities, and the entire LGBTQ+ community. In the face of so much adversity, we resist and demand that states advance toward transformative, care-centered economies without leaving women behind. We will not accept hate speech or discrimination. Women's rights are human rights. Thank you very much.
We appreciate your valuable contribution, Ms. Colavan. Next, we will hear from Rebecca Ali Govaya from Asociación Familia de Desarrollo Población, who will represent the coalition Life and Family. Ms. Govaya, you have the floor.
Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegations, representatives of civil society, we speak today on behalf of the Life and Family Coalition, composed of organizations from across the hemisphere that strongly defend the right to life from conception, the value of marriage and the family, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. While we unite with the call to build resilient and inclusive economies in the Americas, we state clearly, there is no sustainable development if the right to life is denied. There is no authentic inclusion if the natural family is excluded. There is no resilience if freedom of conscience is persecuted. A solid economy begins by defending the most vulnerable. It is impossible to move forward in consolidating a system based on the disposal of human life. No society that eliminates its weakest members can be called just or inclusive, much less resilient or prosperous. The family, based on the union between man and woman, is not an ideological or cultural construct. It is an anthropological fact and a social good. It is a first network of economic, emotional, and educational support. To destroy it is to weaken the pillar on which every resilient society is built. Finally, we raise our voices for thousands of citizens and organizations that today are silenced for thinking differently. True inclusion requires pluralism, not the imposition of ideologies contrary to human dignity. We propose to this Assembly a moral foundation based on 3 concrete actions for the construction of solid, resilient, and inclusive economies, to include the protection of human life from conception to natural death in all its stages, in all public policies and regional programs, prioritizing budgets for medical care and support for pregnant women in vulnerable situations, to recognize and strengthen the essential role of the family as an economic, educational, and social actor, guaranteeing its inclusion and participation in development plans and policies to combat poverty, guarantee full freedom of conscience and expression for all social actors without discrimination or censorship, requesting that objection of conscience be respected in medical, educational, and labor context. Today, more than ever, the Americas need moral courage to build a future, and that future will only be truly humane if it is based on the most basic principle of justice, that life and family are the true heart of any sustainable and inclusive economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Govaya. We now turn to Gustavo Adolfo Amaya from the Center for Training and Promotion of Democracy Association, who represent the Coalition Inclusive Dialogues. Mr. Amaya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We would like to extend a warm and brotherly greeting to everyone here. And we are speaking on behalf of the 11 organizations that make up the Inclusive Dialogues Coalition and the over 100 organizations that are part of the Latin American Caribbean Network for Democracy, REDLAD. It's a pleasure for us to take part in this space for listening and reflection. It allows us to contribute to the construction of more just and equal societies from the grassroots as civil society organizations, which we are. The theme of this GA, Building Resilient and Inclusive Economies in the Americas, calls for an active, constructive role from all actors in the region to build, resist, and include, requires a process of dialogue, participation, and hard work, particularly in the context of a global economy that is showing signs of recession. According to various sources, in 2025, a slowdown of the economy is expected, but with regional disparities. While we see moderating in inflation rates and environmental sustainability is a key factor for economic development, everything is influenced by global trade and geopolitical tensions. For Latin America, the trend is similar. There are projected economic growth rates of around 2%, low investment, and high levels of national debt in most of the region's countries. And this goes along with social challenges such as high poverty rates, gender gaps, high flows of migration, and the lingering effects of COVID-19. And this creates a challenging outlook for citizens in general. So, how can we build resilient and inclusive economies in the Americas? From the Inclusive Dialogues Coalition, we would like to highlight 3 essential factors for strengthening economies. First, respect for institutions, the prevalence of democratic systems, and 3, the existence of a strong, empowered, participatory civil society. These 3 factors reinforce one another and ultimately have an impact on the well-being of the population. Their convergence can be summarized as a full democracy, which cannot be considered complete unless it exists in every country of the region and creates positive externalities for all citizens. Stability and respect for institutions are based on stability and trust. We want to build resilient economies.
Mr. Amaya, let me thank you for your kind words and reflections. And at this time, we give the floor to the coalition of LGBTTI+, represented by Randall Duran-Teodul from the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. Mr. Teodul, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary General and everyone present. The most urgent and pressing issue for our hemisphere is the alarming deterioration of democratic guarantees in the region and the concerning authoritarian trends shown by several governments which foster polarization and violence and commit serious human rights violations. We are particularly concerned about the attacks and harassment against human rights defenders and journalists. We denounce the repression of protests and also persecutory laws, such as the one enacted in Peru, which hinders access to funding for civil society organizations and seeks to criminalize and obstruct their work. It is necessary to implement equal opportunity frameworks in the countries of the region in compliance with the principle of non-discrimination to which the OAS has committed itself. To this end, states must eliminate the barriers that prevent LGBT people from accessing education, employment, professional training, housing, and social security. Access to healthcare, including mental health services, is further restricted by the defunding of public health system for trans people. All these barriers are compounded by the lack of legal recognition of their gender identity and the persistence of police and institutional violence against them. We demand recognition of the contributions that migrant workers, including LGBT migrants, make to the economies of both host and origin countries. The Americas cannot be a territory of rejection and exclusion driven by xenophobia and racism. A resilient and inclusive economy must place care at its center. LGBT people want public and inclusive care systems, and we want to provide care on equal terms. We need legislation that recognizes our families and the community bonds we create. In Panama, for example, the Supreme Court continues to uphold its decision not to approve civil marriage for same-sex couples. Furthermore, the Legislative Assembly has passed laws that go against the American Convention on Human Rights. such as the prohibition of adoption by same-sex couples. This situation is mirrored in other countries of the region. LGBT people continue to face obstacles in accessing justice. Violence against us remains unpunished, and worse still, is being fueled by disinformation and hate speech, often disseminated by government officials. As a result, the rates of murder, beatings, torture, and forced disappearances, rape, and suicide of LGBT people remain alarmingly high. We are certain that it is impossible to build resilient and inclusive economies when democracy, multilateralism, and consequently the human rights of all people are being eroded and put at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teodul. Now I give the floor to the Coalition for the Dignity of Persons with Disabilities in the Americas. This intervention will be delivered through a pre-recorded video by Dean Lehrman from the National Coordinating Committee for the Visually Impaired.
Las organizaciones
Regional and sub-regional organizations of the Americas, recognized by the OAS and the UN system, alongside national, regional, and local organizations of persons with disabilities, extend a cordial greeting to the OAS Secretary General. We would like to begin this conversation by recognizing the work of the OAS and its technical, legal, and administrative bodies, which, along with organizations for persons with disabilities and representative organizations, as well as social movements and various other civil society entities, have made possible the OAS General Assembly adopting the Inter-American Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities. And at the same time, we express our concern because in 2026, we are culminating the decade of the Americas for the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. This is a document that facilitated the creation of public policies to ensure real inclusion of persons with disabilities with a human rights, gender, and intersectional approach. Today, we raise our voices for the over 85 million persons living with disabilities in the Americas, and we see those persons as active agents in building more fair, sustainable, and inclusive societies. We would like to make an urgent call on member states of the OAS. Let us move forward in implementing and designing and structuring public policies that ensure that persons with disabilities are able to enjoy their right to live with dignity. Let us evaluate the real impact of the decade, and let us renew our commitment so that in 2026, we don't see the end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one based on the implementation of measurable results, inclusive budgets, and active participation of organizations that represent persons with disabilities. Above all, this is an opportunity to build a hemisphere that is more fair, humane, and truly inclusive.
Thank you, Dean. With this intervention, we now conclude the first segment on the representation of civil society and social actors. I would ask that the representative of those presenting earlier remain seated to hear the interventions of states in response to your presentations. I would want to invite at this time the heads of delegations to respond, beginning with delegations that have expressed their interest in advance. I will give the floor, therefore, to the delegations of Chile, USA, Colombia, Brazil, and Colombia, in that order, before the other state representatives who wish to make contributions do so. Again, it would be in this order: Chile, USA, Brazil, Colombia, and any other state that wishes to make an intervention.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Secretary General. Thank you to the ASG. Thank you to the representatives, particularly members of civil society who are with us today, and those who are with us near and far this morning. In the context of closing this space for civil society in many places of our region, I'd like to indicate the crucial role that civil society and CSOs play in achieving political, civil, and social rights in the Americas. In Chile, we staunchly believe that dialogue with civil society improves our ability to have a positive impact on the day-to-day life of individuals with concrete results. In the context of our foreign policy, for example, in addition to building multiple consensuses and initiatives, we have, for example, during the process for drafting our feminist foreign policy, held meetings with members of civil society to hear their perspective throughout the entire process. In March of 2025, for example, we organized a meeting to present the advancements in implementation, thereby reiterating our commitment to transparency and accountability. Similarly, we have been carrying out a consultative process with members of civil society, the environment, academia in the city of Valparaiso, with the Secretariat for Biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, known as BBNJ. And this is a process that reflects our belief that a responsible foreign policy also needs to include citizens' participation, and that is why our country has been institutionalizing our work with civil society. And we also have been working with our foreign ministry to achieve that. With that experience, which enriches our work, we have seen that civil society motivates us to move along these lines in the OAS, seeking to ensure that our organization becomes a facilitator of consensus and broad participation from CSOs. We understand that citizens' participation in all forms is fundamental to collectively building our democracies, the common good, and through them we can build a fairer, more prosperous region. In light of these objectives, we have been working with coalitions of civil society in order to address their concerns and ideas for improving participation in our organization. We took part in the update process for regulation to improve participation from some civil society and CSOs, changing their status in the department and the institutional makeup of the OAS, and I would like to share just a few components of that. We believe that new leadership at the General Secretariat of the OAS and the transition is without a doubt an opportunity to move forward toward more meaningful participation from all of you, members of civil society, concretely, which adds more value to our society. We see that civil society's participation is a political issue and also a pillar of democracy that's fundamental to the OAS. Our own Inter-American Democratic Charter addresses this in many different ways, including in Article 2, where we have been working to actively promote that work in this environment. In this section on relations with civil society, we can do much more in the office where you are registered. For example, we would like to see you working on best practices with member states in the areas of citizens' participation and issues that are relevant for the region, such as transparency, security, and other areas where civil society has so much to contribute. Bringing social organizations that have a positive impact in our country here with the support of the OAS has certainly allowed us to bring that impact to the global level. Just to conclude, I would like to state that we staunchly believe that a cross-cutting approach in public policies seeks to enrich the OAS processes, and civil society can be a driver to improve relations between member states. It can help us shed light on the work of the OAS throughout the entire hemisphere, and certainly include greater, more robust participation in all of the pillars of this organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, and thanks to the government and people of Antigua and Barbuda for their gracious hospitality. We look forward to working with Secretary General Ramdin to restore the efficiency, credibility, and core focus of this organization, that of maintaining the peace and security of the democratic states of the region free from malign external influence. At the same time, defending democracy also means defending open discourse. The ability to speak freely, question openly, and disagree without fear is not disorder. It is a safeguard against tyranny. Civil society helps to keep public debate honest and institutions accountable. That is a strength, not a threat. We strongly disagree with some of the policy preferences that we will hear from some of the civil society participants today. But we thank all of you for engaging constructively on some of the most urgent issues facing our region. Illegal immigration threatens national and regional security. When authoritarian regimes or transnational criminal networks facilitate or manipulate illegal immigration, the ensuing chaos strains communities, drains resources, and undermines sovereignty. Every state has the right and a duty to secure its borders and enforce its immigration laws. In Nicaragua, the Ortega Murillo regime represses its own people, jails priests, and weaponizes illegal immigration to destabilize our region. In Venezuela, the Maduro regime seeks to criminalize civil society, even penalizing now economists for accurately reporting the state of Maduro's economy. And in Cuba, more than 700 political prisoners remain unjustly detained. The regimes in these countries fear their citizens' voices and the very idea of a free society. Chair, we also commend the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights when it focuses on the most egregious abuses and violations, particularly in states where victims have no meaningful access to justice. That is why we have nominated Rosa Maria Paya, a courageous defender of fundamental freedoms and human rights and a tireless opponent of tyranny, to serve on the Commission. We encourage governments and civil society across our hemisphere to stand behind her candidacy. Your endorsement matters. Her voice will strengthen the Commission at a time when moral clarity and courage are needed most. And let me speak clearly about a freedom that's too often overlooked, freedom of religion or belief. The search for religious freedom predates the United States and brought many of our founders to our shores. But today, anti-Semitism, anti-Christian hatred, and other religious hatred is unacceptable. Attacks on faith-based organizations are increasing. We cannot be indifferent. Chair, let me close by reaffirming our commitment. The United States will continue to work with member states and civil society partners to defend sovereignty, uphold liberty, and secure a safer Western Hemisphere for all. As President Trump has affirmed, the United States will always defend its people, its borders, and its values, and we will seek others in the Americas who seek the same. Thank you very much.
Mic for the speaker, please.
No, okay. Again.
Secretary General, ASG, Foreign Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, heads of delegations, representatives of civil society organizations. It's an honor for me to represent Brazil at this dialogue with this organization, with these organizations of civil society. We deeply value the participation of CSOs in all of the OAS's debates. We are convinced that dialogue with civil society is fundamental in order to overcome current challenges and together build a hemisphere that's more prosperous, inclusive, and safer. Namely, the goal of building resilient and inclusive economies throughout the Americas cannot be achieved in a vacuum. The economy, the social factor, the environmental factor must all be taken into consideration, and we can only overcome our challenges together with all aspects of society together: workers, business people, the scientific community, civil society organizations, NGOs, and within the OAS, more than just being a practical matter. This is a commitment that all member states take on. The social charter of the Americas is clear on this. Article 21 says that the fight against poverty, the reduction of inequality, and the sustainable use of natural resources are main challenges that we have to address throughout the hemisphere together, and with great participation from the private sector and civil society organizations. In other words, we have an obligation as an organization and as member states to ensure that the projects and programs that the OAS pushes forward are implemented in a participatory way, showing solidarity. And if we don't act thusly, our ability to be effective will be compromised. Constant attacks against democracy that lead to intolerance and polarization must remind us that we base our actions here on complementarity, on plurality, on solidarity. We are diverse. We always have been. We don't always share the same positions and perspectives on the way we see the world, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we are united in our efforts to bring better living conditions to our populations, consolidate democracy and prosperity for all. The theme for this assembly couldn't be more timely because it brings us to discuss the matters of inclusion and diversity so that we can bring about greater development. This is the vision that Brazil has and many other countries in terms of respecting people's rights and their dignity and to protect them against all kinds of discrimination. Hate speech will not bring us into the future. We must create conditions for prosperity. For us to have actual dialogue, we must respect a diversity of perspectives, even when we all disagree. And so dialogue with civil society is even more important in that sense. Hearing from the different social movements is fundamental to building an environment of tolerance where we can respect different viewpoints and live in harmony. And so we have to prioritize robust and effective policy that will protect this diversity throughout the region. We need decisive action to fight against all kinds of discrimination. Otherwise, we'll never be able to build those resilient and prosperous economies, and the OAS will play an important role in that regard. The OAS agenda makes clear how important the organization's work is in multiple areas like human rights, but also integral development. And the organization needs to be able to translate these aspirations into concrete goals. We hope that we'll be able to bring support to the Afro-descendant projects with development banks, initiatives that will allow for exchange and will allow us to improve our climate resilience, improve infrastructure throughout the region. And our debates have made it clear where we stand on multiple matters. We need to address multiple matters in more comprehensive and cross-cutting ways. Representatives of civil society in Brazil made it clear that we can't just increase the control measures for human rights in order to fight against discrimination. We need for the OAS to be consistent and work more in tandem with us. We also have to work in a cross-cutting fashion on climate change. COP30, which will be held in Belém do Pará, is an opportunity for us to have that dialogue, and we hope you will all participate. I want to reiterate Brazil's initiative to work with civil society so that we can address all kinds of systems like those mentioned here today. And to conclude, I want to say that The proposals by the Secretary General to perfect the OAS are an opportunity for us to see how we might be able to include civil society more fully in terms of more transparently and effectively carrying out our initiatives and bring about greater results. I have no doubt that our dialogue and our commitments will be stronger so long as we have more voices from society included. Thank you very much.
Buenos días para todas.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, Secretary General Albert Randin. To all those present here today and those listening in, I want to begin by highlighting the importance of these dialogues with civil society and with all other social actors. We continue to believe that this dialogue is fundamental so that we can hear firsthand what the priorities of our communities are in terms of social justice, racial equality, gender equality, and inclusion. We are convinced that true democracy must seek to protect and ensure women's rights, those of indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, workers, and groups that have been historically marginalized. And to that end, the Inter-American human rights system is key. That's why at this assembly, Colombia reiterates its commitment to this system with the candidacy of Maria Clara Glarbis, whose experience covering over 30 years makes her an amazing candidate for being part of the Inter-American Commission. Colombia also held the 22nd Inter-American meeting of labor ministers. During that meeting, we adopted our first agenda that includes matters relating to climate change, decarbonization, and the active role of labor ministers in such matters. We also adopted the Declaration of Unionists and Workers, a clear example of inclusive social dialogue. We remain committed to our cross-cutting gender perspective, and so that we can aid those individuals with disabilities as well, helping them to find positions in the labor force. We are trying to increase their participation in international debates on this matter. Similarly, we are trying to further consolidate the full participation of indigenous populations and Afro-descendant communities in our national agenda. As guardians of biodiversity, their roles are absolutely essential when it comes to fighting climate change, something that we will be discussing next week, and which is part of a consultation we had in that regard. Colombia also leads initiatives in the region as momentum for protecting the rights of Afro-descendants, as well as migration integration, with a focus on human rights and dignity. To summarize, our commitment remains clear. Within this government, we want to build societies that are fairer, more inclusive, more sustainable, with active participation from all individuals and with respect for nature, as President Gustavo Petro Rego has said unwaveringly since he took the presidency. Thank you very much.
Según la pantalla, voy a pasar.
As you can see on the list, we're going to now give the floor to the head of delegation for Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Oh, I thought that you had said Paraguay. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to speak now. Well, thank you so much for giving me the floor. Secretary General, ASG, distinguished delegations, representatives of civil society for Uruguay. It is such an honor to be here with you all at this session. We want to take this opportunity to reiterate once more our commitment to strengthening human rights as a basis for sustainable development and inclusive development, as well as the importance of promoting dialogue with civil society, which we are convinced strengthens our democracies. Chair, our country has promoted a series of legislative reforms that broaden rights, eliminate structural barriers, and guarantee equitable access to essential services for all individuals without discrimination. Among these measures, you have fundamental laws in the areas of gender equality, sexual and reproductive health and rights, equal marriage, voluntary interruption of pregnancy, and other matters. These are a reflection of our commitment to move towards a fairer society. But we didn't arrive here alone. Throughout our democratic trajectory, Uruguay has always promoted dialogue with civil society organizations, recognizing them as fundamental participants in the process of building more inclusive societies in terms of setting standards and promoting social inclusion. Women and teenagers continue to face all kinds of issues in terms of their autonomy. In Uruguay, access to quality sexual and reproductive health services is essential. And that, along with contraception methods, we have found to significantly reduce maternal mortality rates. We have the lowest in Latin America and the Caribbean. We've also seen a major reduction in precarious abortions. We urge countries to establish guidelines and laws and move towards public policy that will protect the lives of women and teenage girls. We are also concerned over growing issues that LGBTQIA plus individuals face. That's why we're convinced that we have to work together to promote respect for the human rights of all and fight against all kinds of intolerance. We must guarantee full and significant participation of LGBTQIA plus individuals in the social, political, and economic spheres. Chair, to conclude, we want to highlight that if we want to live in democracy, we must live in diversity. The respect for all identities and all kinds of families strengthens our democracies and promotes fairer, more inclusive democracies. Uruguay will continue to work with concrete action and with our multilateral commitment to have a continent that is full of justice and void of discrimination.
As we close this round, let me thank the representatives of member states for your interventions. To open the next round, I will now proceed with the second round of interventions. And in that regard, I'm pleased to invite and to welcome Girl Yoselin Guadalupe, the representative of the National Girls Movement, Together for Justice and Gender Equality International Plan, who present some of the recommendations issued by the boys and girls at the 23rd Pan American Child Congress. Ms. Guadalupe, the floor is yours.
Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jocelyn. I am 16 years old, and I come from the National Movement of Girls from El Salvador, with the support of Plan International. I am here to speak on behalf of the 54 girls, boys, and adolescents from 13 countries who participated in the 4th Pan American Forum of Children and Adolescents, organized by the Inter-American Institute of the Child, where we reflected and proposed concrete actions on 3 fundamental topics: early childhood, human mobility, and mental health. On early childhood, we are concerned to see young children living on the streets, working, or without access to education. We call for the creation of dignified public daycare centers that protect their rights while their families work. We want quality education from the start, with appropriate materials and spaces where they can learn through play. We defend the right to play as part of development, and that's why we propose parks, libraries, and safe, clean spaces with greenery where family and community interaction is also encouraged. Regarding human mobility, we recognize that migration is a right, but also often a decision forced by multiple causes. We propose long-term policies that not only address emergencies, but also prevent children from having to migrate out of necessity. We want our voices to be heard here. We, the children, commit to speaking with our communities, sharing our cultures, and reminding everyone that we all deserve to be treated with dignity no matter where we come from. And concerning mental health, we say it also matters. We need psychologists in our schools and hospitals to listen to us and support us. We want our teachers to be trained and given tools to support us. We propose a free helpline available whenever someone needs to talk. We also ask that our voices be considered when we speak up about decisions that affect us. We also want mental health campaigns to reach TikTok, Instagram, using language we understand and that truly speaks to us. We've spoken with honesty and hope. We ask that what you hear today not remain dead letter, but that they become true action. We are not numbers. We are people with rights, dreams, and many ideas to change the world. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ms. Guadalupe, for your contribution, your statement.
Manuela Forero Lopez from the Latin American and Caribbean Women's Health Network, who will speak on behalf of the Coalition of Human Rights of Teenagers and Youth in Latin America and the Caribbean. Ms. Forero Lopez, you have the floor.
Representatives of member states, OAS authorities, civil society organizations, and peoples of the Americas. From the Coalition of Human Rights of Youth and Adolescents of the Americas, we raise our voices in this regional space to express deep concern over the progressive democratic deterioration affecting our region. The rise of governments with authoritarian and fundamentalist practices cloaked in electoral legitimacy but lacking commitment to human rights has created a hostile and restrictive environment for civil society. Particularly alarming is the systematic obstruction and criminalization of those of us who work to defend and promote the rights of youth in all their diversity. The increase in restrictive legal frameworks, public policies lacking a human rights perspective, and limited funding conditions are dismantling the civic fabric and weakening the capacity of young voices to influence. The institutionalized repression marginalizes our agendas and delegitimizes the meaningful participation of youth in democratic processes. Indigenous, Afro-descendant, LGBTQIA+, migrant, rural, disabled, working youth, mothers, sex workers, and HIV-positive youth, among others, face structural barriers that prevent the full exercise of our rights. These barriers manifest in systematic exclusion from the labor market, comprehensive and quality education, and healthcare. Additionally, adolescent girls, young women, and sexually diverse youth face specific forms of violence such as sexual exploitation, early and forced child marriages and unions, which are violations of our dignity and autonomy that must be eradicated through public policies grounded in gender, human rights, and intersectionality. Youth across the Americas demand recognition and guarantees for our effective and binding participation in decision-making processes at all levels. We refuse, and we want our proposals incorporated in public policy, especially those addressing structural inequalities and guaranteeing rights for the youth in all their diversity. Today, we are not asking for concessions. We are demanding rights because we are agents for change, and we are protagonists of political fights. Given the theme of this assembly, we state that there can be no resilience without economic justice for our youth in a region where poverty, digital exclusion, debt, climate crises, and gender violence affect our youth. We require rights to be exercised. There is no hopeful future possible if the present of the youth is denied.
Thank you, Ms. Forero Lopez. I now have the distinct pleasure of inviting to the floor Luis Antonio Martinez Guzman from the Human Life International, who represents the Coalition for Human Development. Mr. Guzman, proceed.
Señor Secretario. Mr. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Your Excellencies, heads of delegation, members of civil society. The theme of this assembly, Building Resilient and Inclusive Economies in the Americas, calls us to an urgent challenge to protect the most vulnerable and strengthen our foundations. Resilience is not only the ability to withstand external shocks, but the strength that comes from within to face the future while protecting the most vulnerable. A society that eliminates the most defenseless, the unborn, is not a resilient society. The family, on the other hand, is the essential foundation of society. It's where we forge solidarity, respect, and responsibility. Without strong families, there will be no resilient or inclusive economies. Therefore, it is urgent to implement policies that promote marital and family stability, programmatic visions for our economies and businesses, where the family is the core of labor, commercial, and market relationships. Inclusion begins from the first moment of life, in the womb, and cannot be just froth that vanishes behind the wave of this assembly, but a profound current that transforms our lives. It must be a tangible reality for all, women, children, born or conceived, the elderly and persons with disabilities, indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples, all those communities and persons who suffer inequality, injustice, and exclusion in the Americas. A truly inclusive economy guarantees not just wealth, but also opportunities. Communities need support to protect the most vulnerable without leaving anyone behind. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge we face is not only economic, it is civilizational. It's not just a matter of building economies, but of building a future where human dignity is at the center of all our decisions. That is why, from the Coalition for Human Development, we call on member states. Let's build economies that not only resist, but inspire. That not only include, but protect. That not only grow, but transcend. Let us make the Americas an example of resilience and justice, where the dignity of every human being and the strength of the family are the pillars of authentic human development. Because when we defend life, strengthen the family, and promote solidarity, we not only build economies, we build civilization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. I now invite Elvia Duke from the International Institute on Race, Equality, and Human Rights, representing the Coalition of Persons of African Descent in the Americas.
Recalcamos que los estados de la región se
States in the region are at a key moment in fighting against discrimination and structural inequality. As indicated by Paul, individuals in the CARICOM regions, namely, are more likely to live in areas of poverty. And even when they have the same amount of experience, they make less than other parts of the population. So an actually resilient economy, one that wants to break with breaking away from the illusion of progress that excludes racialized and impoverished populations. It is essential to ensure that the Afro-descendant population have access to healthcare, education, decent and well-paid jobs, and credit to support their entrepreneurial initiatives. Resilient economies must also have models that are full of solidarity and must take into consideration intersectionality and guarantee women participation as well as that of young people, the LGBTQIA plus population, and Afro-descendants, and deal with non-remunerated work and deal with any matter that impedes the progress of Afro-descendants. Now we have our recommendations. First, the urgent signing, ratification, and effective implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Racism. Extension of of CRD among all states, but namely today we call on the CARICOM region to follow the example of Antigua and Barbuda. Second, increase the number of thematic hearings that examine human rights violations against Afro-descendant populations and their intersectionalities. Just like the United Nations has done, we should have a working group that will look at these matters specifically. Fourth, we want the creation of an economic fund within the OAS for Afro-descendant populations. We want to develop or further develop literature on the human rights of Afro-descendants. Sixth, we want programs and plans to be created to strengthen the economies of Afro-descendant populations, both in rural and urban areas, like the implementation of initiatives that have an interracial and intersectional focus. And seventh, we want to monitor the actual reality that Afro-descendants face when we look namely at the Haitian population currently living in the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Aramis, for sharing those insights. I will now give the floor to Gina Desiree Caldera from Asociación Alianza Venciere as spokesperson for the Coalition for Venezuela.
Buenos días. Good morning, Your Excellency, Secretary General Albert Ramdin, distinguished diplomatic corps, esteemed delegates, colleagues, everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of Coalición por Venezuela, and I'm honored to participate in the 55th General Assembly of the OAS. At a time of profound social and humanitarian upheaval, this GA is a vital space to address the challenges threatening stability in the Americas. First of all, the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela continues to be the largest case of forced displacement worldwide, according to the latest data from UNHCR. More than 7.9 million people have left our country. This has led to constant waves of migration and re-migration throughout LAC. It is projected that the number will reach at least 10 million by next year, and this situation creates significant challenges for the region, including major risks for protection, as well as economic and social challenges that impact states' stability. In the face of this reality, we urge the OAS and member states to promote multidimensional security strategies to recognize human mobility as an essential component of regional resilience. At the same time, they must avoid criminalization of migration or stigmatization of nationalities. Security cannot be understood solely as border control. It must also encompass the protection of rights, access to decent employment opportunities, and guaranteed inclusion in host countries. It's fundamental to establish meaningful participation mechanisms for migrants and refugees. The world's leading nations are moving toward consultative spaces today where voices of those who've experienced migration are not only heard but also actively incorporated in the drafting and adaptation of public policies. This practice strengthens democratic governance. It ensures that decisions respond to real and contextual needs. That is why today, from Coalición por Venezuela, we announce our support and participation in the co-creation of the Independence Declaration on the Rights of Refugees and Other Displaced Persons or Stateless Persons to participate in decisions that affect them. This instrument, which was opened for public consultation on the World Refugee Day, proposes concrete action lines for states to adopt best practices in consultation and co-design with displaced populations. Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, incorporating those who flee the Venezuelan catastrophe is not only a humanitarian challenge, it is also the most powerful lever for building truly inclusive and resilient economies. Multilateralism strengthens joint responses to complex challenges that no single nation can address alone. Economic growth is intrinsically linked to our
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Caldera.
Belén Alejandra Aguinaga from Due Process of Law Foundation, representing the Coalition of Organizations of Human Rights of the Americas.
La Coalición de Organizaciones de Derechos Humanos de las
The Coalition of Human Rights Organizations of the Americas would like to express our delight with Albert Ramdin and Laura Hill as SG and ASG respectively, and we're celebrating the fact that for the first time a person from the Caribbean and a woman are leading the OAS, and this is an important step toward creating a more pluralistic, representative and inclusive OAS, and at the same time we're concerned with the progressive closing of civic space in the region, a trend that transcends borders and ideologies. It weakens participation and representation of victims. In countries such as Cuba, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela, restrictions have been imposed on the work of civil society and independent media through laws criminalizing even engagement with the inter-American human rights system, as well as through funding cuts. Repression against human rights defenders such as Eduardo Torres in Venezuela, Ruth Lopez and Enrique Anaya in El Salvador, the criminalization of protests, the use of security rhetoric to justify persecution must end. This was also reflected in this assembly with attempts to exclude historic organizations, as Argentina did with Catholics for the Right to Decide. In response, we urge states to guarantee proper participation of civil society. We express our concern with the regressive security policies in the region, such as prolonged states of emergency in El Salvador, Honduras, and Ecuador, militarization in Mexico, and excessive use of force in Argentina. These measures perpetuate violence and impunity, disproportionately impacting women, migrants, children, and adolescents, persons with disabilities, and indigenous peoples. We urge the states to adopt security and migration policies that respect human rights with an intersectional, inclusive, and democratic approach. We also warn of the weakening of justice systems. In Peru, the body responsible for appointing and removing judicial officials has been co-opted. In Mexico, judicial reform poses a serious threat to judicial independence. In Guatemala, the Attorney General's office has undermined anti-corruption efforts while criminalizing justice operators, defenders, and journalists. Therefore, the 2026 elections for the Attorney General and High Courts in Guatemala must be closely monitored. In light of rising electoral violence, we call on states to guarantee the right to participate freely, equally, and safely. We also reject restrictions on access to information, which is essential for accountability. We reiterate the urgency of addressing the climate crisis with a human rights-based approach, especially in the face of extractive industries which seriously impact indigenous peoples and their territories, as an approach incompatible with economic resilience and environmental justice. We call for urgent attention to the severe humanitarian crisis in Haiti. Armed violence, displacement, hunger, and institutional collapse demand coordinated responses to place human dignity at the center. Finally, we urge these states to reiterate their commitment to the inter-American system with decisions appropriately financing these decisions.
Ms. Aguinaga. To close this round, we welcome the workers' representative, Marta Pujadas, from the Trade Union Technical Advisory Council of the Trade Union Confederation of Workers of the Americas. This intervention will be through a pre-recorded video.
Saludamos a las autoridades.
We salute the OAS authorities and delegations present, as well as representatives of workers and employers and civil society. Ladies and gentlemen, Warm greetings to Secretary Albert Ramdeen, the recently elected SG, and thank you very much for this space of dialogue. And we regret we were not able to attend the assembly in person, as we had been for many years contributing to dialogue in the Americas. And we salute the theme of this session, which reiterates the need to build economies that are resilient and inclusive in our region. For the labor union movement, true resistance in the Americas requires going beyond the purely economic issue, considering all dimensions faced by the society, particularly the issues related to social, labor, and environmental issues. It must allow us to, we cannot take advantage of all economic potential in the region if we're not able to address the needs of our people. And we must look at informality, labor precarity, inequalities that come together in extreme poverty. These series of crises have an impact on the well-being of family, and that is particularly the case in our countries, and that is why we need vital salaries that are dignified and fair to reflect the living conditions of our workers. In a context of growing mobility of individuals, we need to ensure protection for human rights for all migrant workers without regard for their migration status. Their contribution to economic and cultural development of countries must be highlighted, and we see that this failure to do this impacts the well-being of countries and their economies. With economic growth alone, we will not be able to achieve our goals, and so we must redouble our efforts in order to close the persistent gap between economic growth and social justice. The framework for promoting investment and macroeconomic development must integrate, at the same level of importance, policies for social protection, care, gender equality, social security at work, training, and labor rights in order to ensure fair distribution of wealth and development opportunities. We have been working to promote a positive agenda in this platform for development in the Americas, and we also propose guidelines for a model labor code, which is an alternative to the unilateral reforms which are regressive and which we have seen in some of our countries. We promote a rights-based approach and a fair transition process in order to address the impacts of climate change, technological challenges, and demographic change. In a regional and global context marked by multiple crises, we call for a new social contract focused on individuals to address these new challenges. Labor unions are social and political actors, and we urge governments to promote the importance of institutional and social dialogue in order to concert our comprehensive public policies and move forward on a transformative roadmap. But this roadmap will not be possible, and we will not move forward if we do not address hate speech, authoritarianism, and the undermining of rights. For many years, we have been working along these lines, and we are concerned with the setbacks of labor union rights and collective bargaining. We have seen kidnappings, assassinations, and smear campaigns, and that includes the active use of initiatives to criminalize protest and the right to equality. States must promote and respect, as well as ensure fulfillment of the fundamental rights of workers. And we urge the OAS to redouble its efforts in fulfilling its mandate to promote regional cooperation and unity, and we support this GA with our declaration. We urge you to consider it as a document at the GA. In the face of the reality faced by our people and countries, we must have a broad convocation to all countries to promote dialogue for all stakeholders and cooperative action in the Americas for an agenda that sheds light on inequalities and asymmetry in development while promoting solutions based on peace, sustainability, inclusion, dignified work, and social justice. There, we will find our workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pujadas, for your remarks. And as stated, we have now concluded the second round. And let me thank the speakers for all of your very valuable contributions. I will now invite the heads of delegation to respond, beginning with the delegations that have expressed prior interest. In that regard, I wish to offer the floor to the delegations of Guatemala and Canada.
Excelentísimo Secretario General.
Your Excellency, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. ASG, heads of delegation, civil society representatives, Guatemala greatly values the work of each CSO that is present today, and we reiterate our commitment to civil society participation in multilateral spaces. Guatemala recognizes that dialogue with civil society is not merely symbolic. It's a vital component of any legitimate representative democracy. We celebrate the presence of children and youth from LAC who have drawn our attention to the challenges that persist in exercising their rights. Hearing the voices of children in the region calls on us to reiterate our commitment to the right to childhood and the rights of adolescents to live free of violence with equal opportunities, access to education, and comprehensive health. We promote full participation and respect for their dignity. According to recent data from the Guatemalan Institute for Statistics, children are 61% of our population. Their life and rights of each one is important, and that is why the government under President Arevalo is committed to respecting their fundamental rights and recognizes them as holders of full rights. We recognize the efforts carried out in updating our national policy on youth. We also salute the representatives of indigenous people and Afro-descendant communities, as well as organizations that work to recognize their collective rights and historic reparations. Guatemala has reiterated its commitment to actively including indigenous and Afro-descendant communities in drafting our public policies, eradicating structural racism, and strengthening spaces for participation that respect their autonomy and right to self-determination. With Coalición por Venezuela, we reiterate our position in favor of a peaceful, democratic solution based on strict respect for human rights of the Venezuelan people, and we reiterate our support for any multilateral efforts seeking to reestablish institutions and the democratic order in that country. Additionally, we greatly value the contributions from the Coalition for Human Rights Organizations of the Americas, and we recognize the efforts of defenders who, despite challenging contexts, have continued to fight for truth, justice, and non-repetition. Against this backdrop, Guatemala has adopted a new policy that has opened doors for international human rights mechanisms to promote frank dialogue, technical cooperation, and a review of pending commitments. I would like to share with all of you that our government has been working to promote public policies for protecting human rights defenders. This is a commitment that has been pending in the inter-American human rights system. We also recognize the importance of labor union movements and remember that respect for labor rights is a fundamental access to any sustainable and democratic development model. Guatemala is very concerned with the weaponization of justice systems to undermine democracy, particularly attorney general's offices, which have been co-opted by stakeholders that want to intervene in elections and persecute anyone fighting against corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Guatemala has, with determination, shouldered its responsibility to defend the constitutional order and rebuild spaces for citizens' participation. During historic, peaceful protests in 2023 led by indigenous communities and social sectors, we saw that democracy was sustained in the face of great challenge, and this citizens' movement allows us and forces us to move forward promoting inclusion and full respect for human rights. And in Guatemala, we reiterate that only through representative democracy, gender equality, inclusion, and participation that is intergenerational in nature will we be able to respond to the major challenges our region faces. That is why we reiterate our commitment to continuing to work with all of you, from civil society, indigenous communities, the Afro-descendant community, women, youth, international organizations, in order to build a hemisphere focused on human dignity. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Chair. I would first of all like to thank all of the participants here today, CSOs, and civic spaces that they create are an essential pillar to society that is truly resilient, inclusive, and democratic. Canada is deeply concerned with the setbacks of civic spaces, as well as growing threats that weigh on human rights defenders in many countries worldwide, including in the Americas. We note that some of this threat comes from foreign interference as well as anti-rights movements in the region.
Canada is greatly concerned by credible reports indicating that in our region, human rights defenders, journalists, environmental and labor activists, Indigenous peoples, as well as people of African descent, are frequently targeted for harassment, violence, and even killings. Reports also indicate that LGBTI+, two-spirited, and women's rights defenders are still under threat, facing institutional and societal backlash. In Venezuela and Nicaragua, civic space continues to suffer the criminalization by the state of dissent and restrictive legislation leading to countless arbitrary detentions, forcing human rights activists and defenders, social and indigenous activists, and religious leaders into exile. Canada applauds the courage and resilience of all civil society actors that face restrictive legislation and intimidation. Their unwavering commitment to defend human rights, fundamental freedoms of expression, and democratic values are indispensable to the preservation of civic space and democratic norms. Canada deeply values the voice of every group gathered with us here today. I would like to acknowledge the presence and participation of Indigenous peoples, recognizing their unique contributions, knowledge, and leadership in our collective dialogue. In Canada, June is National Indigenous History Month. It is a time for us to honor the stories, the achievements, and the resilience of Indigenous peoples. Mr. Chair, Canada recognizes the importance of partnering with women's rights organizations, and we take pride in our partnership with the Inter-American Commission for Women to advance gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity. Canada is deeply thankful to LGBTI+, two-spirited organizations for amplifying the voices of historically marginalized communities and for their unwavering dedication to creating and promoting a more inclusive future. Canada reaffirms its commitment to working with OAS institutions to strengthen the role of civil society in our deliberations. We believe we are the richer for it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I now give the floor to the delegation of St. Kitts Nevis.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One moment. Right. St. Kitts and Nevis recognizes not only you, Mr. Chairman, but of course our distinguished Secretary General, all of our dignitaries, our excellencies who are here, and in particular my colleagues and observers at this very important session. St. Kitts and Nevis has long demonstrated a significant commitment to protecting the rights of our citizens and our residents. This was further demonstrated when on May the 28th of this year, we deposited at the Organization of American States two critically important instruments of accession to major inter-American human rights conventions. That is, the Inter-American Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Persons with Disabilities, and the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons. As a result, Mr. Chairman, St. Kitts and Nevis became the 20th country to join the former, which is the first legally binding international instrument specifically addressing the rights of persons with disabilities, thus reaffirming fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right not to be discriminated against due to disability. St. Kitts and Nevis also became the 13th country to join the Convention on Protecting Older Persons, aimed specifically to promote, to protect, and to guarantee the full recognition and exercise of human rights and fundamental freedoms for older people. But beyond these international commitments, Mr. Chair, the government continues to enact domestic measures. And so back in August of 2022, the Ministry of Youth, Empowerment, Aging, and Disabilities was established for a focused approach to issues affecting the vulnerable community, to enhance public awareness, to institute programs and policies, and of course to promote accessibility and ensure stronger participation of all of society. While the Constitution of St. Kitts and Nevis guarantees freedom of religion, and in response to felt challenges and periods of marginalization specifically faced by the Rastafarian community over several decades, the current administration has already enacted progressive legislation in order to ensure that members of the Rastafarian community are able to assemble, are able to worship, are able to practice their faith and way of life freely and without apprehension. Additionally, Mr. Chair, St. Kitts and Nevis has approved and commenced the implementation of the National General Equality Policy and Action Plan. This specific policy underscores the government's unwavering commitment to fostering gender equality and creating an equitable society as well. St. Kitts and Nevis remains resolute. It remains resolute in its dedication to promoting all human rights, access to justice, advancement and inclusion for all people, and of course to empowering our own citizens in St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, St. Kitts Nevis, and I thank the representatives of member states for your respective interventions. We will now proceed with the third round of interventions. And the first speaker in this round will be the representative of the Coalition on Sexual and Reproductive Rights, Rocio Pilar Garcia Garro, from the Civil Association for the Right to Decide, Catholics for the Right to Decide, Argentina. Mr. Garcia, the floor is yours.
Estimadas.
Dear representatives of OAS missions, with deep regret, we wish to highlight that sexual and reproductive rights across the continent are under constant threat. First, We want to emphasize the disregard by certain states for the presence of civil society organizations defending sexual and reproductive rights in international spaces is yet another form of censorship that impacts democracy. Additionally, we see that civil society organizations have been criminalized in El Salvador, Peru, and Paraguay, subjected to tools aimed at controlling, silencing, and stigmatizing their work. Additionally, budget cuts to international cooperation in 2025 have already impacted the lives of girls, women, and other identities, undermining their sexual reproductive rights and increasing gender-based violence. The reduction in funding slows down the response to humanitarian emergencies, impacts safety and the well-being of women, girls, and other identities affected by natural disasters, conflicts, and other crises. When it comes to HIV, we see this is a growing new cause of infection and death. And in 2022, the WHO recommended decriminalization of abortion and its treatment as a health procedure. It should not be addressed as a crime. And yet, countries such as DR, El Salvador, and Honduras, among others, absolutely restrict access to safe abortions, forcing women to endanger their lives. Additionally, even in countries where it is legal, we see access to essential supplies limited. The situation is particularly critical for women and girls with disabilities, as well as those living in rural, indigenous, and Afro-descendant communities. We must see states adopt comprehensive measures to prevent, punish, and eradicate all forms of sexual and reproductive violence, including banning practices such as forced sterilization, medical procedures without informed consent, and any form of imposed reproductive control. We cannot lose sight of the fact that many states do not guarantee access to abortion for girls. They risk their lives and health. They are girls, not mothers. States must allocate sufficient budgets to ensure that women, girls, and LGBTQ+ persons have immediate access to contraceptive methods, emergency hormonal pills, as well as abortion services, HIV and AIDS treatment, and other sexual and reproductive health services free from stereotypes and discrimination, and incorporating an intersectional perspective. Thank you for your attention. We hope that this GA will be an opportunity for states to present, and reiterate their commitment to full effective guarantees of sexual reproductive rights in the region without setbacks or exclusions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. We now turn our attention to a presentation by the Coalition Citizens Forum of the Americas, represented by Amaru Ruiz Alemán from the Central American Association for Development and Democracy Local Network. Mr. Ruiz Alemán, the floor is yours.
From the Citizen Forum of the Americas, we greet this assembly and thank you for the space granted to civil society participation. Speaking of resilient and inclusive economies requires recognizing that the economy cannot be separated from human dignity, democracy, and respect for fundamental rights. Exclusion, inequality, and corruption are structural factors that weaken our economies just as much as natural disasters or global crises. There is no resilience without social justice. That is why we insist that any economic strategy must place the protection and promotion of human rights at its core, especially for those who have historically been marginalized, such as women, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, LGBTQI+ individuals, migrants, and youth. Violence in all its forms, especially gender-based violence and organized crime, is a direct obstacle to development. Therefore, it is essential to build safe societies based on respect for human rights, the strengthening of democracy, and inclusive collective action. To women we say, your lives and leadership are not a footnote in the economic agenda. They must be a priority. Economic security and inclusion are essential elements of women's well-being and development. So too is the climate crisis. Communities that care for the land, indigenous, Afro-descendant, and rural, are not obstacles to development. They are key allies for a sustainable future. Defending their rights is defending the resilience of our economies in the face of environmental collapse. In a context marked by rising authoritarianism, hate speech, and digital disinformation, building resilient economies also requires protecting civic and democratic freedoms. This includes the right to association, freedom to protest, transparent, free, and fair electoral processes, access to public information, and active citizen participation in decision-making.
También se construye de
Resilience is also built through public integrity. We reaffirm our commitment through the Citizen Corruption Observatory to strengthen a culture of legality and transparency. Corruption not only drains public funds, it drains public trust. We are not here only to denounce. We are here to propose. We want to be part of the collective construction of public policy. We demand that civil society be heard, especially grassroots organizations, youth, and historically excluded communities. Building a truly inclusive economy is not just a technical task. It is a deeply political, ethical, and human rights-based endeavor. We invite you to walk with us because inclusion is not decreed, it is built. As a Nicaraguan, I cannot fail to mention the suffering of my country. More than 5,600 civil society organizations have been arbitrarily shut down, including 11 indigenous. There are 53 political prisoners, including 11 indigenous people. For this reason, we call for solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aleman. I now give the floor to Yunova Acosta from Latin American Youth Network for Democracy, who represents the coalition Democracy, Freedom, Justice, and Political Renewal. Ms. Acosta, please proceed.
Buenos días.
Good morning, Secretary General, ASG, and member states. Our coalition denounces the ongoing grave violations of human rights and the total destruction of democracy in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. These regimes persecute, imprison, and exile citizens for exercising their rights, using their bodies as political bargaining chips. Currently, more than 2,000 people are political prisoners in Latin America, including over 1,100 in Cuba, more than 900 in Venezuela, 53 in Nicaragua, and over 300 in Bolivia. Among them are José Daniel Ferrer and Felix Navarro, Cuban activists and promoters of the Cuba Decides campaign, both beneficiaries of precautionary protection measures granted by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The regime denies them contact with their families. We denounce the brutal persecution by the Venezuelan regime against democratic youth, especially Maria Oropesa and Jesus Armas, two young Venezuelan activists and members of Juventud LAC, who were kidnapped by the Maduro regime after the stolen presidential elections. Their only crime was raising their voices for freedom and the will of the people. We further alert that the murder of Sankang is another example of this. The regimen of our different nations are hurting us all, and we denounce the political persecution against Janine Áñez and Santa Cruz in Bolivia. We denounce the role of the Cuban government in the collapse in Venezuela. And in coordination with the regime of Nicaragua. We want to state our concern over growing legislation to criminalize civil society, restricting its legitimate role in defending rights throughout and civic participation in our region. We warn about the implementation of measures that threaten the independence of the judiciary, undermining one of the essential pillars for guaranteeing rights and democracy in our countries. We make an urgent call to the member states of the OAS so that we can call on the liberation of all these political prisoners. We condemn the use of repressive legislation against civil society and protect its legitimate exercise. We call on OAS member states also to defend judicial independence, and we demand respect for the results of the presidential elections in Venezuela. The Inter-American Democratic Charter must not be a symbolic document. It is a guide to action. We ask you to uphold it and to ensure it's upheld.
Thank you, Ms. Acosta. We will now hear from Rodrigo Ivan Cortes Jimenez, representing Dilo Bien Zacatecas and the Coalition on Freedom of Conscience and Expression. Mr. Cortes, The floor is yours.
Embajadores, ambassadors, authorities of the Organization of American States, representatives of civil society. On behalf of the Coalition for Freedom of Conscience and Expression, we wish to contribute to the reflection on how to build resilient and inclusive economies in the Americas from a perspective that respects freedom of conscience and expression. The economies of our countries will not be resilient if they continue to rely on oversized state structures that foster dependency and weaken individual and community initiative. It is necessary for states to adopt a subsidiary rather than paternalistic role, promoting the empowerment of individuals, families, and social organizations as protagonists of their own development, rather than mere recipients of assistance or ideological colonialism. In this context, we express concern over the draft resolution titled Addressing the Severe Mental Health Crisis in the Americas, presented by the Permanent Mission of Antigua and Barbuda. While it stems from a real and urgent diagnosis, it proposes the creation of new institutional mechanisms, a working group, a regional fund, and a technical secretariat, without budgetary backing or evaluation of the impact of previous mandates. All of this contradicts the recent report by the CAJP, which calls for institutional and budgetary restraint. Furthermore, we are concerned that this resolution includes explicit references to documents such as the PAHO Strategy CD60/9, which promote non-consensual ideological categories such as unlimited gender identities and non-binary frameworks. These concepts are not necessary to technically address mental health, and their inclusion imposes a divisive ideological vision that could fracture regional consensus and undermine future multilateral negotiations. Mental health must be addressed from a human, holistic approach that respects the cultural and legal realities of each state. Therefore, we propose eliminating mandatory references to such documents, limiting the creation of new structures unless there is financial backing, and promoting voluntary technical cooperation that recognizes existing national efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Cortez. Our next speaker is Ms. Rocio D'Angelo from the Citizen Go, who will speak to us as a representative of the Coalition Youth and Liberties. Please proceed.
Presidente, señor Secretario General.
Secretary General, Your Excellencies, our generation is facing a silent crisis that many still refuse to see. We are told the economy is recovering, yet young people still cannot access decent employment, own a home, or look forward to a future with certainty. Meanwhile, many decision makers who grew up in times of prosperity remain fixated on causes that, while important, do not address the real and urgent challenges facing new generations. Gender inequality and climate change dominate every forum, but what about the inability to access the labor market? What about the impact of artificial intelligence displacing jobs? What about the frustration of millions of young people who feel they did everything right and still can't make ends meet? If this General Assembly is going to address the challenge of developing inclusive economies, then let's talk about freedom, because we are increasingly concerned by the persecution of those who think differently, the labeling, the canceling, and the silencing of plural or divergent perspectives in public debate. Resilience requires a diversity of ideas, freedom of conscience, and the freedom to dissent. If we don't defend that, we are not building inclusion or development. We are building conformity. We're building arbitrary dogmas and exclusive dogmas. Another topic that cannot be left out of a serious debate on economic development is education, and not just any kind of education, not an education captured by ideological agendas. We are witnessing the imposition of a single worldview on sensitive topics like sexuality, often without transparency or genuine dialogue with families. Meanwhile, millions of children don't even have access to basic quality content. Delegates, the urgent issue is not to impose ideology. It is to ensure that everyone learns to read, write, reason, and think freely. Building resilient and inclusive economies is not about repeating the same slogans over and over again. It's about truly listening to the youth who today feel alone, frustrated, and excluded. It's time for member states to realize that international fora that they are disconnected from reality, and that this is something that needs to change urgently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. D'Angelo. Next, we welcome the Coalition on Drug Policies, represented by Ivan Chanis Barahona of Fundación Iguales. Mr. Chanis, please proceed.
Secretary General, ASG, Foreign Minister for Antigua and Barbuda, heads of delegations, everyone. This year and last, at the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, we witnessed clear signs of change in the international approach to drug policy. In 2024, for the first time, a resolution presented by the United States explicitly incorporated harm reduction as part of the global response to drug use, using clear language centered on public health, scientific evidence, and human rights. This resolution broke the traditional Vienna Consensus, marking a turning point in international drug policy and making it clear effective life-saving tools can no longer be ignored. In 2025, Colombia promoted the creation of an independent panel of experts with civil society participation to conduct a critical evaluation of the international drug control system. This resolution opens the door for the first time to an honest, pluralistic, and evidence-based review of the effectiveness, impacts, and consequences of the current regime. Both resolutions reflect a growing global understanding of the failures of punitive approaches to this matter. In the Americas, we know this well. Decades of criminalization, militarization, and forced eradication have not reduced demand, supply, or drug trafficking. On the contrary, they have caused serious human rights violations, disproportionately impacted indigenous and rural communities and peoples who use drugs, and deeply weakened our local economies. It is time to return to the principles of the 2013 Antigua Guatemala Declaration and the 2014 Resolution on Human Rights and Drugs adopted by this Assembly, documents that already pointed the way toward more humane, inclusive, and effective policies. Building resilient and inclusive economies requires moving away from punishment and embracing care, recognizing the complexity of the drug phenomenon, and the need for scientific, ethical, and social approaches. From the American Coalition for Drug Policy, we propose 8 priority areas. 1. Move beyond repressive approaches and advance toward legal regulation models that protect public health and human rights. 2. Guarantee universal access to prevention, treatment, and harm reduction. 3. Strengthen the quality and continuity of care with a gender perspective and evidence-based practices. 4. Ensure the right to health for people deprived of liberty without discrimination. 5. Replace forced eradication with sustainable development programs built with communities. 6. Support the request for the declassification of coca leaf and its traditional uses. 7. Fully implement the UN guidelines on human rights and drug policy, as well as the recommendations for the human rights system. 8. Guarantee meaningful participation in civil society and directly affected communities at all stages of the public policy. We reaffirm our commitment to support Don't Punish campaign, and on June 26th, we promote a real alternative to drug trafficking based on care, non-discrimination, inclusion, and social justice. An America without stigma, with social justice and resilient economies will only be possible if we place health, rights, and collective care at the center of our drug policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chanis. To conclude this segment, we now turn to the private sector. Mr. David Funes de Rioja, President of the Business Technical Advisory Committee on Labor Matters. This intervention will be through a pre-recorded video.
De la Comisión Empresarial de Asesoramiento Técnico.
It is an honor for me to speak to you all today, heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. And greetings to the Secretary General, especially for the organization, Mr. Albert Ramdin, during his first General Assembly. This meeting is being held in a complex global context, where we have geopolitical institutions that come together and bear witness to an accelerated advancement of technology. We have to highlight the role of social dialogue, which was fundamental in complex moments like during the COVID pandemic. We must now use this to design a productive strategy for the region. This is a concrete tool to build consensus around a productive agenda. We need a new agreement that will seek to promote production, competitiveness, and equality. We need full respect for the work that we undertake. Competitivity is a necessary condition for the sectors that face on a daily basis competition at a global level. We have to be able to support business endeavors. We need an agenda that is compatible with efforts being carried out in the business sector. And we have to adjust our social protections in line with such an agreement. We need conditions that will allow for investment, for productivity and competitiveness, because that is the foundation for economic development. Hand in hand with strong institutions that will facilitate dialogue within frameworks that will allow us to strengthen our economies. Additionally, we should highlight that today, economic recovery requires financial mechanisms that are not necessarily available in our region, and that's why we must all participate more actively. So we have to support the transition from informality to formality. We have to build bridges between the different worlds of production, because productivity and competitiveness are all parts of the same challenge.
Thank you, Daniel. I will now invite member states to reply, and we have so far received expressions of interest from Peru, Paraguay, Antigua and Barbuda, and Jamaica. Without any further announcements, the order: Peru, Paraguay, Antigua, Barbuda, and Jamaica.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Chair. My delegation welcomes, firstly and especially, the hospitality of the government of Antigua and Barbuda, as well as the work carried out by the Secretary General and the ASG in facilitating the dialogue that we're holding today. Similarly, we welcome the participation of multiple civil society organizations who have come to enrich our dialogue with their contributions. Peru participates as part of the Inter-American Commission, as well as within the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and we support the undertakings of both institutions within the system. Peru has solid and joint institutionality to guarantee the promotion and protection of human rights. Currently, we have 4 national plans concerning human rights. Among them, we have our national multi-sectoral policy on human rights for 2040, adopted in 2024. Which is a strategic tool. It's multi-sectoral and comprehensive in nature and seeks to guarantee those rights. Concerning the, as it pertains to the concern mentioned when it comes to the creation of Peru's APSI initiative, this initiative seeks to strengthen transparency and accountability mechanisms when it comes to the use of international resources, regardless of their origin. It does not seek to restrict or impede the freedom of civil society organizations. The registry that the law considers creating has no impediment to people's ability to exercise their fundamental rights. It simply seeks to ensure a transparent and accountable way of using cooperation funds pursuant to recognized models throughout the Peruvian Constitution. It's worth highlighting that there is regulation still pending concerning this initiative. We will have mechanisms to reduce administrative burden, and we will try to prioritize accessibility and the acceleration of multiple procedures. The APSI has promoted training programs for civil society organizations with a view to promoting an appropriate understanding of the scope of the law. Everything depends on the separation of powers. In that regard, the government of Peru plans on respecting the freedoms and abilities of different institutions throughout the state. The government of Peru is committed to ensuring the undertakings of multiple institutions while respecting our foundational documents. We want to protect human rights as well as ensure respect for a diversity of perspectives in multiple areas. Applying this law or this guideline would be done pursuant to all international law adopted by Peru and pursuant to our obligations within the inter-American system. Thank you.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning, distinguished representatives of civil society, Secretary General of the OAS, ASG, distinguished heads of delegations. It's a pleasure to be with you once more in such a relevant space within the inter-American system, which allows us to hold dialogue in a genuine, direct way. That's why I want to speak sincerely, frankly, about matters that are sometimes difficult to address and reach consensus on. First off, I want to mention the matter of democracy. The OAS must rediscover its reason for being. In a hemisphere where there are still dictatorships that pursue and silence others, where violations of human rights multiply day by day, our priorities must be clearer, and our commitment to democracy should be firmer. Nicaragua and Venezuela are open wounds in the democratic conscience of our region. These are regimes that violate the fundamental rights of their own citizens, and they threaten the stability of the continent. Given these issues, Paraguay does not plan to remain silent. We demand free elections, justice for political prisoners, and full respect for the rule of law. We have heard from the brave voices of civil society today, and Paraguay aligns with their call. The OAS must recover its role as a safeguard for the rights of people of the Americas. Without a doubt, this is the first line of defense. Anyone who tries to undermine it through hate speech seeks to threaten our very rights. Paraguay will not accept censorship, or will not accept for censorship to become a norm, or for it to become a human right. When the concept of human rights is used to justify censorship, when it's used to impede the development of human life and development, to attack private property or the essential principles of a free society, the concept is empty and it becomes a tool for ideological manipulation. Paraguay will always raise its voice against such actions.
Defendemos
We unwaveringly defend that protection of human rights begins with the right to life at conception, a principle that we protect in our Constitution and within the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, but also through a deep ethical conviction. Similarly, we reiterate that right to private property is essential to a free society. And development of markets would also be essential to having healthy societies. So in Paraguay, we're working to have predictable, solid rule of law to ensure that every citizen can prosper. Within the framework of this assembly, it's important that we say so clearly. You can't have resilience without economic freedom. There is no true inclusion if you don't respect every single person's right to produce and grow. And obviously, when we talk about human rights, you need to recognize the rights of all before the law. Paraguay is unwavering in this sense. We reject discrimination for constitutional reasons. We respect everyone's intrinsic equality without exceptions, but we also defend truths that are not subject to trends or imposed narratives. Our legislation, as well as Paraguayan society's understanding of reality, gender is equal to your sexual identity. We need to apply law in a way that is coherent and consistent with what our society believes. We are sure that harmonious life is something we can aspire to. We will continue to defend just causes, no matter what, without asking for permission. We know that defending life, family, freedom, and sovereignty is a just cause. It's what's needed. It's what's right. Rest assured that Paraguay will not give up these convictions. We will always defend them with the bravery and legitimacy that comes from the truth.
I have a red light. Does that mean I can go ahead? Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, representatives of civil society, the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda welcomes you all to this very important dialogue here in our country. We are particularly pleased to host this space for open and constructive exchanges between OAS member states and civil society organizations whose voices we regard as vital to the strengthening of our democracies and the promotion of human rights. We congratulate you on the job that you have undertaken with so much passion and with so much compassion. Antigua and Barbuda fervently endorses the imperative that there must be more rights for more people, and indeed for all people. We recognize and deeply respect the critical role that civil society plays in championing rights, highlighting injustices, and urging governments and institutions to do better. We must end tyranny in the world, and particularly in our hemisphere, wherever and wherever it raises its ugly head. Your advocacy challenges us to act with greater courage, deeper empathy, and unwavering commitment to justice. We are especially grateful for the presence of organizations that are urging immediate and drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. The climate crisis is not a distant threat for us. It is present and it is growing. As a small island developing state, Antigua and Barbuda is among the first and worst affected by global warming and extreme weather events. But let us be clear, while we may be on the front lines, no country, however large, is immune. This is not our battle alone. It is a shared fight for the survival of all. And once again, we thank those civil society organizations that have been in the forefront of bringing this matter to the attention of the world and calling for urgent action. Our delegation is honored to have drafted and presented the resolution on mental health that this Assembly is expected to adopt within the next 48 hours. We are deeply appreciative of the civil society organizations that have long championed this issue. Your persistent and passionate advocacy has paved the way for this long overdue step. Now your labor is bearing fruit, and we are proud to stand with you in advancing mental health across the Americas. I could not end this presentation by also thanking those who have stood up over the years in defense of the rights of indigenous people and Afro-descendant communities throughout the Americas. They have both been marginalized groups, and they continue to be victims of discrimination. We must all raise our voices strongly wherever this continues to happen. It must end. Finally, in closing, we express our sincere pleasure in hosting this significant and timely dialogue. We hope it will continue to serve as a forum for partnership, for respect, and for shared responsibility between governments and the people that we all collectively serve. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, His Excellency Albert Ramdin, Secretary General, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, civil society groups, good morning. It is fitting that the first official engagement on the General Assembly's schedule is with our partners in civil society. Your work remains indispensable to the realization of inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development in the Americas. The theme of this General Assembly, Building Resilient, Inclusive Economies in the Americas, underscores our shared responsibility to ensure that no one is left behind as we confront the many challenges facing our hemisphere. Civil society actors bring a wealth of expertise, innovation, and knowledge that help to ensure that policies are responsive to the needs of the people they serve. They are also often the first responders to crises, the advocates for the most vulnerable, and the voice of communities whose perspectives enrich our policy discussions. Partnerships with civil society have proven particularly valuable in social protection, where civil society has been a vital partner in reaching marginalized communities and supporting the most vulnerable. In climate resilience and sustainable development, where we encourage the continued engagement of civil society in advancing climate action and disaster preparedness, as well as the protection of the environment, which are critical to the sustainability of our economies. In good governance, transparency, and human rights, with the promotion of democratic values, accountability, and human rights, which remains central to our national and regional agenda. And in youth engagement, as Jamaica supports partnerships to promote youth empowerment, skills development, innovation, and entrepreneurship as pathways to inclusive economic growth. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I close by acknowledging the important role of civil society in nation building, and thank you for your invaluable contribution in this regard. Thank you.
I thank the delegations for their comments, their contributions. And we will now proceed to the fourth and final round of interventions by civil society and social actors. We will begin this segment with Mr. Dennis Lange Beltran from Latter-day Saints Charities. Mr. Beltran, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm honored to speak today on behalf of Fidela, el Foro Interreligioso de las
The International
Fidela is an organization that works with many civil societies represented here and elsewhere. Fidela facilitates dialogue about religious freedom among diverse groups in the Western Hemisphere. We think that by respecting the freedom of religion or belief of others, we strengthen our society. Thank you to the member states, the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, and the officers and personnel of the OAS for this opportunity. And we also thank the representatives of civil society who are participating. We're here to advocate, we are all here to advocate for a better world, to find ways to build resilient and inclusive economies in the Americas. Fidela seeks to find common ground through dialogue between government officials, scholars, civil society, and religious leaders. Solidarity does not require that we agree on everything. Differing opinions are part of the fabric of healthy democracies. We recognize that everyone deserves equal dignity and respect, regardless of their backgrounds and beliefs. But Fidela believes that we can only protect our liberties in this world by also protecting the freedom of others to believe and worship according to the dictates of their conscience. Religion and religious organizations have enormous potential for good. Religious belief is a vital force in the lives of billions of people. It generates vast social value and well-being, education, medical and humanitarian assistance. Religion plays a fundamental role in family life and the development of individual identity and purpose. Now imagine what could happen to a society and an economy if people lived up to the values taught by their religion more faithfully. Discrimination and hate would have no place among us. We would find solutions to generational poverty and hunger, not to mention the other economic benefits to society. We thank the OAS for its support of dialogue between people who are willing to work together for the good of all, despite differences in religion, belief, culture, and politics. We ask the other civil societies here today to look at the collective power we have to solve problems in this hemisphere in spite of our differences. We look forward to working with as many of you as we can in accomplishing these goals together. We trust that those here are operating from a place of well-meaning and good intentions. We are striving for a better society. We need not view those with whom we disagree as our enemy. Let's have a renewed commitment to listen to others who think differently with an open heart, to respect the human dignity of all people and put our collective energy into working on building resilient and inclusive economies in the Americas. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Danilza Peña, representing Young Americans Business Trust. Ms. Peña, you have the floor.
Gracias. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Danilza Peña Medina, a young Dominican leader who spent over 10 years working continuously in support of youth development in my country and globally. Today, I represent the youth of the Americas who have raised their voices through contributions and actions that they're implementing as part of the ongoing process of the Young Americas Forum program developed by the Young Americas Business Trust, YABT, in partnership with youth organizations around the region. These efforts align with the theme of this GA and the priorities leading up to the 10th Summit of the Americas to be held in December in this year in my beloved homeland, the Dominican Republic. I'm pleased to present the progress toward the 7th Young Americas Forum and its components, developed in partnership with the government of the Dominican Republic and its role as chair of the summit process, and with support of the Summit of the Americas Secretariat of the OAS and the Banco de Reservas of the Dominican Republic. As part of the Entrepreneurship for Action component, the 19th edition of the Talent and Innovation Competition of the Americas is underway, featuring the Startup Challenge and the Bioplastics Challenge. Both initiatives respond to the theme of the 10th Summit, building a secure, sustainable, prosperous hemisphere, focusing on citizen, food, energy, and water security. The Startup Challenge, in partnership with the Banco de Reservas, closed its registration with over 1,200 young participants from 28 countries, supported by over 200 experts and numerous local organizations. The finals will be held on August 12th in celebration of the International Youth Day. Meanwhile, the Bioplastics Challenge, in partnership with the OAS Executive Secretariat for Integral Development, was launched on World Environment Day under the theme Beat Plastic Pollution. Therefore, we invite OAS member states to mobilize youth participation in leading the transition towards sustainable materials by promoting the development, commercialization, and adoption of bioplastics in the Americas. Regarding the youth participation component through virtual consultations and youth dialogues, I would like to share some recommendations and proposals, that is water security, citizen security, and others, and also working to promote or working with the United Nations and other organizations, also working with the private sector to invest in youth, allocating appropriate resources to support their role in inter-American agenda and national plans. Your support is crucial for us to move forward together. The 7th Young Americas Forum of the 10th Summit of the Americas is a great opportunity to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Peña. I now invite Christian David Badillo Gutierrez from the Foundation for the Promotion of Family and Freedom, who will speak on behalf of the coalition Building New Horizons. Please proceed.
Excelentísimo.
Your Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished authorities, representatives of member states, I recognize that despite the challenges, the advancements of the 21st century, modernity, globalization, the rise of AI, the right to the fundamental freedom of thought, conscience, and religion continues to face major challenges and is systematically and increasingly violated. This human right is recognized in Article 12 of the American Convention on Human Rights and is a fundamental pillar of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Expressions of discrimination, intolerance, and even persecution on religious grounds have reached alarming levels. This is reflected in statistics, specialized reports, and documented testimonies. In many cases, it is institutionally and socially normalized or rendered invisible. Frequently, freedom of religion is reduced erroneously to private choice and worship without recognizing it actually encompasses much more. It's the right to live, express, and act according to one's convictions, both in public and in private, and to do so without fear or retaliation. We are deeply concerned with the growing hostility toward those who, from their beliefs in sacred texts, do participate in public debates on issues related to the freedom of conscious life, family, or human dignity. It is essential for us to recognize that religions and faith communities make concrete, positive contributions to building resilient and inclusive societies and economies in the Americas. They provide humanitarian aid, education, healthcare services, and support to the most vulnerable sectors of society. And in many countries, religious institutions are present where the state is absent. They play a key role in democratic consolidation, strengthening the social fabric, economic and cultural development, and promoting values such as peace, solidarity, and justice. Therefore, we propose the following proposals to this Assembly. 1. Establish a permanent monitoring mechanism on religious freedom in coordination with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to document violations of this right, issue early warnings, and formulate effective recommendations. 2. systematically include freedom of religion in annual human rights reports, shedding light on all religious diversity. 3, promoting education and awareness campaigns to foster mutual respect, interreligious dialogue, and the prevention of discrimination and hate speech based on religion. 4, formally recognize the religious sector as a relevant actor in the development of democratic life and social life, as well as the economic life of our nations. Religious freedom is an inalienable right of every person. Guaranteeing it leads us toward a truly free, diverse, democratic, and resilient Americas. Religious freedom for all, by all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Badillo. Our next speaker is Maria Lucila Esquivel from Organización Mujeres en Superación, who will speak as representative of the Coalition for the Rights of Sex Workers. Ms. Esquivel, please proceed.
Señor Secretario.
Mr. Secretary General, representatives of member states, colleagues from civil society, this year, we have borne witness to a historic milestone for the inter-American human rights system, the presentation of the report by Commissioner Gloria Careaga Perez to the Secretary General. The recommendations in that report are clear and forceful. There is an urgent need for regulatory frameworks to guarantee dignity, full security, and effective access to justice for persons who freely choose to exercise sex work. Continue to promote a perspective on sexual services that ignores our autonomy, only fosters stigma and violence. It is fundamental that our states and other bodies of the inter-American system listen to us. We do not want to be patronized or treated as victims. We demand recognition of our autonomy and guarantees of a life free from all forms of violence outside of informality and secrecy. And that is why we request that the General Assembly urgently call on our states to make concrete progress in regulating sex work. 2, continue the work carried out by Commissioner Gloria Careaga Perez and ensure institutional mechanisms for follow-up and monitoring of the implementation of recommendations addressed to the states in the report. Continuing this work would be a concrete sign of commitment to a truly democratic, pluralistic, and inclusive America. Sex work is work, and it is legal. It is our right to exercise it freely and autonomously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Esquivel. We now turn to the Coalition for Access to Justice and the Rule of Law, represented by Maximiliano Herman Dyer from Mental Health Association, Mexico. Please proceed.
Your Excellencies, Secretary General, Your Excellencies, heads of delegation, on April 1st this year, a draft resolution entitled Addressing the Serious Mental Health Crisis in the Americas was presented despite an agreement not to introduce any new resolutions, and we share the urgency of seriously addressing the grave mental health crisis in our region, and we celebrate the efforts along those lines. However, we would like to note that that resolution is dangerous, at least, and our association would like to express our concern. We are an organization that works to we see that they want to include a gender perspective and disaggregate data using a non-binary approach. But if we look at the way it is drafted in line with number 7 in footnote 8, that is the new agenda for mental health in the Americas for PAHO, which calls on the countries to set aside traditional approaches to adopt a transformative gender approach and to make a clear stance that includes men and women in their diversity and people with diverse gender identities, and to guarantee the sexual and reproductive rights of women, which we all know means legalizing abortion. NASMA also states that the impact of patriarchy on men's mental health has not received adequate attention, and that mental health laws, policies, and programs must incorporate an approach that recognizes toxic masculinities. And obviously, for that, they must have an influence on adolescence and childhood. And from the perspective of mental health, we can state that the gender perspective leads to breakdowns in mental health for the population in general, including youth and children. And we see that the scientific community increasingly questions this approach. Therefore, we urge governments to take all necessary steps in order to ensure that the PAHO, its strategy, and the new agenda for mental health are reviewed and freed from any ideological terminology. This is not based in conventional biomedical evidence, but rather it stems from biosociological and philosophical currents whose validity and methodology are subject to scientific debate. Finally, we underscore that if all of this is rejected and contradicts the laws and constitutions of many member states and even threatens their sovereignty, if international organizations do not respect the law and treaties, there can be no rule of law or Organization of American States. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dare. Our penultimate presenter in this round will be Ms. Maria Bezeni Martinez from Sociocultural Movement for Haitian Workers, and she will represent the Coalition of Human Mobility in the Americas. Please, the floor is yours.
Buenos días,
Good morning, dear representatives of the OAS, delegations, members of civil society. My name is Maria Bezeni Martinez, and I represent the Coalition for Human Mobility of the Americas and the Social Cultural Movement of Haitian Workers. It is relevant to thank you all for this space for dialogue and reflection, and share that our coalition could not do its work without reflecting on migration. The Americas and the Caribbean have been shaped by various waves of migration, and migrant communities have enriched the social, cultural, and economic fabric of the places wherever they have settled. However, myths and prejudice rooted in xenophobia have been wrongly constructed around migration, perpetuating acts of discrimination and racism. The belief that migrants are a burden to educational system, healthcare systems, and that they even steal work from the locals or are a source of insecurity are part of the disinformation that has been linked to migration in the countries of the Americas. The reality is, in fact, the contrary. Migrants create vibrant economies, and this is the case for their host countries. Migration is not a crime, especially when it takes place in situations of human rights violations and a lack of guarantees in people's countries of origin. Human mobility has been a constant throughout human history. It will continue to be so. And no matter how restrictive migration regulations are in destination countries, this will be the case. Therefore, states must seek and implement all possible means and strategies to guarantee this right. And on the other hand, they must work in coordination from a human rights approach to strengthen mechanisms and alternatives that are flexible to allow for humane and safe migration. From the Coalition on Human Mobility in the Americas, we call on states to respect, protect, and guarantee the human rights of persons in human mobility without distinction, in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Therefore, it is necessary to create clear, orderly, safe, and flexible migration pathways, as well as policies for socioeconomic integration to ensure this integration and prevent threats such as migrant smuggling and trafficking in person, as well as statelessness. We also urge the adoption of national and regional frameworks to reflect principles of non-criminalization, inclusion, and also access to justice. Today, the time has come for states to create effective coordination among countries of origin, transit, and destination to share information, fight disinformation, and create greater access to information for migrants.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. And to conclude this final segment of representations from the civil society and social actors, I will invite Mr. Nicholas Panotto of the Multidisciplinary Study Group on Religion and Public Incidents, who will speak on behalf of the Coalition of Religious Beliefs and Spiritualities in Dialogue with Civil Society. This intervention will be delivered through a pre-recorded video. Mr. Panotto, please proceed.
In the framework of the theme, we are very concerned with the impact of the deepening of certain socioeconomic and political models at the regional and global level. The entrenchment of these models is accompanied by regression in agendas and minimum consensuses previously reached by states and civil society with regard to acquired rights. Specifically, we see how some governments and civil society actors promote hate speech and legitimize explicitly discriminatory practices. This leads to the violation of civil rights. And we see a particularly endemic issue with the closure of spaces for public expression, especially in the use of force in public spaces. We also are particularly alarmed by the rising statistics of the violence, including of against defenders of rights. Many of these defenders have been forced into exile or even murdered due to their work. For all of these reasons, we believe it is fundamental that we address this crisis context. As a coalition, we recognize that all spirituality drives for active commitment to solidarity and transformation of structures that perpetuate exclusion and violence. And we also call for religious coexistence to promote respect for diversity, listening and understanding others, the hope and cross-cutting nature of opening up in the face of the calls and clamor of the most vulnerable. We call for love, shared love that arises from the recognition of human dignity without moral restriction and is committed to social justice and equality. From this perspective, we make the following key calls: that member states and civil society carry out an open and honest dialogue on the democratic crisis in the region to find minimum common ground and reiterate respect for human rights as the springboard for any exchange. That states commit actively to protecting civil society and organizations and guarantee their effective participation in democratic and civic spaces without criminalization or censor as part of a participative, plural democracy that guarantees rights. That we continue to value the role of resolutions in the OAS, not only as expressions of diversity of positions in this organization, but a minimum consensus to allow us to operationalize political action, defense mechanism, recognition, and others. And finally, we express our strong rejection of the arbitrary exclusion and censorship of the Católicas por el Derecho de Decidir Argentina, Argentine Catholics for the Right to Choose by the national government. And we consider this a violation of civil society's right to participate, and it's a breach of the legal framework within that country, as well as the agreements that it has shouldered in this very organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Panotto. And with that, we have now concluded the fourth round of presentations by civil society. And I wish to thank all the speakers, all the presenters, for your very valuable, indeed invaluable contributions. I'll now invite the heads of delegations who have registered their expressions of interest to do so in response to the presentations we've heard. And we have so far registered for responses: Dominican Republic, Argentina, Mexico, and Panama. Again, unannounced, the order of responses will be Dominican Republic, Argentina, Mexico, and Panama.
Su Excelencia Chet.
Your Excellency, Chet Green, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Commerce for Antigua and Barbuda, Your Excellency Albert Randin, Secretary General, Nestor Mendez, ASG of the Organization of American States, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the member states, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of civil society organizations, workers, private sector, and other social actors. The delegation of the Dominican Republic welcomes your participation in this forum, as well as the work carried out in your respective nations and at the hemispheric level to promote human rights, sustainable development, security, and democracy. We take note of the concerns brought about today, which without a doubt will be a guide as we dialogue with delegations during our General Assembly. Civil society organizations play a fundamental role for the work carried out in these fora, and your voices are essential to bring visibility to the needs of our peoples, our nations, to propose innovative ideas and solutions which will allow us to build the kind of hemisphere we all aspire to. This General Assembly and the 10th Summit of the Americas are spaces where the voices of our communities echo, those of women, our youth, our boys, our girls, indigenous populations, persons with disabilities, workers, and all the actors that you all represent. The theme of this General Assembly, Building Resilient and Inclusive Economies in the Americas, calls on us all to further build a hemisphere where decisions by political leaders are always taken in favor of our peoples, which is why we need everyone's perspective from all sectors of society. And you all, the representatives of civil society organizations, are a fountain of enrichment, a source of enrichment for the development of our social policy. As you all know, in December of this year, the Dominican Republic will host the 10th Summit of the Americas under the theme Building a Safe, Sustainable, and Prosperous Shared Hemisphere. As the host country for this summit, we urge you all to participate in the processes to carry out this summit. From the chair, we have been able to strengthen participation by civil society in all stages of the process. That is why we have promoted multiple spaces for dialogue and interaction that seek to effectively and efficiently incorporate the voices of civil society and other social actors. Among these efforts, we highlight the presentation of the theme of the summit, which was done at the beginning of this month of June, which allowed for open hemispheric dialogue with over 300 organizations. 70 were present and over 200 of them connected virtually. Similarly, with the support of the Secretariat for the Summit of the Americas, we have carried out workshops titled Summit Lab to strengthen technical capacity through smart methodology. We have also held national consultations that seek to raise funds with a view to enriching the document itself. We wanted to get contributions in that regard, the document that my country will present. We hope that that way the path towards Punta Cana will be truly inclusive and representative. We want a region that is safer and fairer. We want a hemisphere that is resilient, but also deeply human. And to achieve that, we must count on you, your experience, your observations, and your ethical commitments. Let us move forward together towards the building of a more inclusive, more integrated continent. So, Chair, to conclude, I want to express that in the Dominican Republic, we have rule of law, where we respect and ensure human rights for all. always seeking to protect the security and sovereignty of our nation, which includes the safety and security of all those who live in our country. Thank you very much.
Señor Ministro.
Foreign Affairs Minister for the organizing nation, this beautiful country, Antigua and Barbuda. It's a pleasure. This has been so well organized. We've borne witness to such great hospitality. Secretary General of the OAS, ASG, ministers, vice ministers, colleagues, and esteemed representatives of civil society throughout the Americas. The Republic of Argentina seeks to express its deepest appreciation for the wonderful opportunity to participate in such a significant event, which is a living space where states parties to the Organization of American States and civil society come together. I heard each of the presentations delivered by civil society and those statements delivered by my colleagues, so I will try not to take up too much time. This space for dialogue and reflection allows us to consolidate the fundamental values we share beyond anything we might just feel and which are truly the rules of the game. Among them, we have especially highlighted Article 19 of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, which establishes the obligation to adopt special measures to protect children. This principle is a cornerstone of Latin American law when it comes to children and childhood. Similarly, we discussed the delicate matter of divided families. In that sense, Article 17 of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights as a whole and Article 7.4 of said convention offer clear language concerning the protection of the family in general and the child specifically, and the interest of the child above all. Additionally, we highlighted religious freedom, a right that is protected broadly and deeply throughout the convention. And its spirit is freedom in its greatest expression. None of these freedoms can be impeded or suspended, not even in exceptional situations, as is enshrined in Article 17 of the Convention, especially reminding everyone whose fundamental rights have been repressed, especially during the pandemic. Finally, the government of Argentina wants to highlight the commitment of the Inter-American system to protecting life. The Inter-American Convention is the only treaty that enshrines the nation's obligation to protect life by law from conception, which comes through a clause that seeks greater progress, not regression, in terms of human rights. We have great appreciation for the civil society organizations that contribute, enrich, strengthen this solid doctrine of human rights and freedom, which we proudly recognize as our own, the Inter-American System of Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. We want to especially acknowledge the government of Antigua and Barbuda for hosting this General Assembly. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, distinguished delegates, good morning to everyone. Mexico is pleased to participate in this dialogue with representatives from civil society, indigenous populations, Afro-descendant communities, workers, the private sector, and other social actors. We are confident that the social and cultural diversity of our region is one of the greatest assets in the hemisphere, which is why your involvement and participation in all spaces of the OAS strengthen multilateralism and benefits all persons. We welcome the great plurality of your contributions because that enriches the work that we carry out within the multiple mechanisms of the OAS. Citizen participation is a key aspect of democracy, and that is why Mexico promotes and favors exchange of ideas and contributions by civil society organizations and other relevant actors. This dialogue and exchange of plural, founded perspectives allows us to listen to multiple viewpoints and receive proposals to ensure people can exercise their human rights fully and move closer to fairer societies where everyone can exercise their rights fully. We want to especially acknowledge the valuable work of Paulina Corominas, who has strengthened the inclusion of all voices in multilateralism at an inter-American level. Mexico reiterates its commitment to continue working towards a greater broadening of spaces where all sectors and actors within civil society can participate further within the OAS, namely the participation of indigenous populations, migrants, youth, the participation of the LGBTQ+ community, individuals with disabilities, women and girls in all their diversity,
así como de cualquier
as well as that of any vulnerable or historically marginalized group, with an intersectional focus and the firm conviction that inclusive societies which benefit the richness of the wealth of plurality represent the best possible destination that we can arrive at, a world where we can respect everyone's rights, their well-being. Thank you very much, Chair.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Excellency Evelyn Porchet-Greeny, Alvin Randin, Secretary ASG Nestor Mendez, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of civil society and member states. We would like to extend a cordial greeting from the Republic of Panama. We are deeply appreciative of the warm welcome we've received here in Antigua and Barbuda in our preparation for the General Assembly. We want to begin by expressing our appreciation also to the Sector for Relations with Civil Society, the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equality, Paula Corominas, and her team for facilitating this space. This dialogue reiterates the importance of opening the doors of our organization to those who represent the diversity of voices of the peoples of the Americas. Panama recognizes strategic allies in civil society when it comes to designing public policy, monitoring the fulfillment of inter-American commitments, and above all else, keeping the connection alive among states and their citizens. On behalf of my country, I reiterate our unwavering commitment to strengthening these spaces for participation and dialogue. We deeply value your contributions, which today have reminded us of the urgent need to integrate climate change, environmental protection, and the rights of indigenous peoples as essential parts of inclusive and fair development. Panama, in that regard, has taken on a position of regional leadership in defending the oceans and marine resources by increasing our protected area by 54% and contributing to the 30-30 global goal for the protection of natural ecosystems. We are similarly promoting a transition towards a sustainable economy where we promote public policy that facilitates coastal community integration and respect for human rights. We know that protecting the environment is not an option. It is a responsibility, an intergenerational ethical commitment that we have to take on, and we are committed to moving forward with an ambitious climate perspective, one that is socially inclusive, hand in hand with civil society. Finally, I want to extend a cordial invitation on behalf of the government of the Republic of Panama to join us next year in our country, where we will hold the 56th regular session of the OAS General Assembly. That meeting will be held concurrent with the bicentennial for Panama, which is a historic moment that will remind us of the vision of integration, peace, and intercontinental integration. This will be a fantastic opportunity, not just to share our, not just to celebrate our shared legacy and heritage. We will also be able to strengthen multilateralism as a way to together face the challenges of both today and tomorrow. Thank you.
We thank the delegations for their comments. Before we close today's session, I wish to invite our esteemed Secretary General to share his thoughts and reactions to what today has been a very spirited and meaningful engagement. I want to thank you all for participation, but find it quite fitting that our SG be allowed an opportunity to share his thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your leadership. I believe we are off to a great start of this General Assembly. This has been an excellent debate, a very rich debate, honest, frank, open, and with many suggestions, but most importantly, we have heard about the real concerns on the ground, in communities, in the different sectors in our civil society, about what they would like to see as a priority. And I can tell you that in follow-up to your remarks, which I thank you for being here. It's not always easy to be here and take part in such a gathering, but I'm very happy that you did. But we have also listened to the member states who have expressed their views. And this is the unique opportunity that we have, is while we respectfully listen, we have points of coincidence, of coherence, where we agree. There are also points where we have no agreement. But that's exactly the purpose of this very inclusive approach, is that we listen respectfully to each other's opinions and that we share that information. So I believe, Mr. Chairman, that is the purpose, and we have seen it today clearly demonstrated. What we will do now, basically, as a Secretariat is that, and I want to thank our section that is in charge of relationship with and organizing these meetings with civil society, led by Paulina Corominas and her team, for putting this together. I think the system is getting better and better, and that makes it all more efficient, very much rule-based, but I also appreciate that most of you have kept to the discipline which the chairman has alluded to at the beginning. Appreciate that as well, so that more people can speak. We have taken good note of the proposals made, but also of the concerns raised as a General Secretariat. And rest assured that we will follow up on those internally, but certainly in the debate and the discussions with member states in terms of what possibly member states could decide on. Many of the mandates already exist, but it's now about possibly amending those or adding some more elements to it. So that follow-up will be done. And let me conclude by saying we look forward to continuous debate. In my statement, I made it very clear. It is not a one-off. It's not only once a year, but we need to make sure that there is a process of ongoing consultations so that we don't lose momentum. Thank you all very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the member states, as well as to our guests. Thank you.
Colleagues, the final word falls to me, and as such, As we bring this dialogue to a close, I extend my sincere gratitude for your engagement, your candor, and the very incisive observations of all participants. No doubt member states have taken note of the ideas expressed by civil society representatives, which will inform our collective efforts to translate them into action. We honor the tireless work of civil society organizations that you undertake daily in communities across the hemisphere. Let us leave here with renewed resolve to uphold democratic norms, to strengthen resilience in the face of climate and socioeconomic challenges, and to ensure that the voices of all sectors continue to shape the way forward. We all want to build resilient and inclusive societies for all of our people. The insights exchanged here today serve to reinvigorate our collective commitment to inclusive progress. I thank you all for your invaluable contributions and for reaffirming that genuine dialogue is the cornerstone of meaningful change. With these words, this meeting is now closed.
Por favor, les agradecemos. Les agradecemos, por favor, dejarlos recibir.